Some buyers have a preference to really buy the electrons in the market where they are consuming powers. Other customers are really looking for 24/7, so they want to generate green electrons for every same hour in the same amounts that they're consuming electrons. Each customer has a slightly different preference.
Before we get started, you have such a cool name. I know I asked if it was Scottish. I knew it was Celtic at some kind, but tell us who you are, give us where you're from, and then we're going to unpackage a lot of complicated stuff about renewable energy, okay?
Sounds good. So I am Eamon Perrel. Eamon is an Irish name.
Yeah,
It is Gaelic. You nailed it. Now, I was named after a historical figure named Eamon de Valera, who was an Irish freedom fighter.
Oh, nice. Is your family Irish? Is that what it is, or just inspired by it?
Not so much Irish, just inspired by it.
What are you guys, Germans? What are you?
A little bit of everything.
Okay.
We've been in
You're
Virginia
Americans.
for a very long time.
Oh, yeah, you grew up in Virginia Beach?
Yeah.
Not a bad place.
Virginia
probably.
Beach, Norfolk area. Love it. We live
All
2 hours
military.
away. We still try to get down there whenever we can.
People don't realize how massive Norfolk is, but it's the largest naval base in the world.
It's huge.
That's
You
incredible.
go down there, you have aircraft carriers, you have jets flying overhead all the time. You have
pretty
people
cool.
going up and down the beach in helicopters.
Is that
It's
cool?
great. It's great.
Very patriotic. Is your family's from Virginia originally, I guess?
Yes. Yep.
So, Eamon, we talked briefly, and the rest of it I wanted to leave uncanned for this one because I've been trying to demystify the energy aspect of this industry. The two existential threats to this industry are people and power. And I've tried, and I continue to try to focus hard on labor, right? I think that we're at an inflection part within the industry, and we're shifting to a completely different type of delivery model of data centers, and which means we have a completely different delivery team strategy for how we build and deliver data centers. But power is one of the hardest things, right? Now, the beauty about the power side is it's what's marrying to us because the massive demand for aggregate volumes of power that is driven from primarily the adoption rate of emerging technology, specifically AI. So there's so much demand. And right now, we've discovered that the demand is untenable and it's unscalable based on the current available capacity in the U.S. grid. So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to implement for short-term bridging solutions in the long term before we get to a bigger overall total solution. You and I talked.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and listen, so you and I talked briefly, and I don't have the capacity to understand and explain to everybody just all the nuances behind legacy traditional electrical utility, what we're doing on the renewable side, what we're doing for natural gas, and then all the things that we're doing collectively, including like green hydrogen or whatever, to get to nuclear, right? So to that end, we talked briefly and you were dropping some interesting things, and I said, within seconds, I was like, we need to talk, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
explain to some people, let's start at the very beginning with you. You're from Virginia Beach. You went to Virginia Tech or something like that? I think where'd you go?
From Virginia Beach, I developed an interest in computer science in high school. Actually, my senior year project was, I don't think they called it AI back then, but it was genetic algorithms.
Oh, wow.
Basically, you take sequences of instructions and you create a population and you have them compete against each other. You take the top 10% of performers and then you create a new generation out of it.
Really?
Eventually, over time, the process improves. So became fascinated by computer science. Went to Cal Berkeley to study computer science in 1998. It was a very interesting time to be in Silicon Valley.
Sure. Right before the dot-com bust.
Right before the bust. So
Yeah.
as soon as the bust happened, people started coming back from all the jobs that they
Sure.
left college for. It became kind of a strange time out there. I started studying physical geography. It's one of my side classes, which is basically climatology. Starting to understand a little bit more about the climate and climate systems. I also started studying more theoretical mathematics, which I really had more of a passion for than electrical engineering and computer chips.
Yeah, everyone
which is
has a
what I was
passion for
studying at the
theoretical
time.
mathematics, right? I mean, that just seems like something that. But why were you doing that? Were you trying to be an instructor, a professor? What were you trying to?
I had no idea. I just liked it, so
Okay.
I was studying it.
Okay.
Then after 3 years of school, I realized exactly that. I have no idea what it is I want to be doing. So I took a year off. I traveled in South America, came back, transferred into UVA, and finished up in mathematics. After undergrad, I worked as a commercial construction manager for a few years. building office buildings, a lot of work for the University of Virginia. I took a brief stint studying English in China. Then I came back to business school. And when I was there, my intent was to get into real estate development. But I thought for my summer internship, when else in life you're going to have a chance to just take a random job and try something new?
Yeah.
So I did, and I worked for a wind energy company in Houston. It was called Horizon Wind Energy at the time. It's now known as EDP. And I loved it. It was a fairly new industry at the time.
Wind energy was the early 90s? What are we talking about?
This was 2008.
Oh, okay.
It started in the mid-90s out in
Okay, that's right.
California.
98 is when you're out there. That's right.
But by 2008, it was still pretty small
Yeah.
and growing. So I liked the growth of it. I liked the energy, the white space, the ability to have an impact on an industry, and the ability to get into a startup. So coming back from that internship, I knew I wanted to be in the industry, but I wanted to have a little bit more impact than just working for a large company, so I joined a startup.
Yeah.
At the time, there were 3 of us, and the principals had successfully started another company and sold that to BP Winds North America. So I got to see Apex Clean Energy, which is the company that I work for, start from scratch and scale from a team of 3 to a team of, I believe, about 450 people now, which is still not huge within our space.
But 3 to 450, that's big in any space, actually. How long ago was that?
That was 2009.
So what does Apex Clean Energy do? Like, walk us through what they are.
Sure. Yeah, we develop large-scale wind, solar, and storage projects. So
Where are you based out of?
we're based out of Charlottesville, Virginia, but we have people all over the country.
Right.
Most of our projects are not in Virginia. Most of our projects are in the Wind Belt, Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Illinois. But we do have other projects throughout the country. So from Virginia out to Arizona, up to Washington State, back over to Maine. Pretty broad swath of the country. We're entirely focused on the United States.
Okay, so you guys started this, the principal started it, it sounds like in 2009, you were employee 3, you're at 450 people now. And from 2009 on, what percentage of the work that Apex Energy, what verticals of industry were they serving, and what was the most prevalent, I guess? Was it data centers or was it something else?
Initially, it was utilities.
Yeah.
Most transactions were with utilities back in 2009. You didn't have a corporate buyer at the time. That emerged probably 5 years later. Initially, we were focused exclusively on wind, where the power would be sold to utilities. We were thinly capitalized, so our business was to develop projects and then to sell them to a larger balance sheet.
Interesting.
Before starting construction. And then
What was the time frame? So the goal was the first one through the wall is the bloody one, right? So people will buy it as a service, so they'll buy it once it's up and running, but no one wants to carry something on their balance sheet for a year and a half, 18 months, how long it takes to build these things probably, right? So you guys got into that game early, and you guys have always had a desire for it to be built up to a certain level and then get taken off your balance sheet, right?
On a project-by-project basis.
Like 3 years? What's the turnaround for these things?
Back then it probably took a good 5 years to develop projects, but we entered the market in 2009. It was the middle of the financial crisis.
Sure.
It was a great time to buy projects without a lot of capital. So we would buy
Because
projects.
they're all distressed assets.
They're
that you
distressed.
Yeah.
You have small developers who have run out of capital. You have large international firms who are just cutting off their U.S. branches entirely. So there are a lot of assets available. So we aggregated several portfolios. And what that allowed us to do was accelerate our time to market by about 2 or 3 years. So we started the company in 2009. Our first project hit at the end of 2011.
Okay. What was it?
It was a 300-megawatt wind project in Oklahoma. I believe it was the largest single-phase wind project in Oklahoma at the time. Since then, they've been larger.
Someone that doesn't understand how renewables work, I tried to explain it on a podcast once where think of energy as a big pool of water. And then that bottle of water is the solar. And my cup right there is the wind. And we just pour them into that big basin of water. And then later on, someone else could come out and be like, hey, I want to buy all the renewables that are in there. Now, we're just scooping out water out of this thing. We don't know where that power came from, but we know we put that much in so we can sell that much of that renewable power out. Is that about right?
That's the case for all power generation.
Okay.
It's all a big pool, whether it's coal, natural gas, you're all putting it into the transmission system. You can't physically track the electrons, but you have accounting for I put this much,
how much is in,
and you're buying it from me at this other point. There may be some type of a delivery charge in between.
So what was the big pent-up demand you were seeing? Was it from, that seems like it was a utility provider. What was driving that demand from the utility provider? Just being good neighbors and trying to have a diversified rate table for the type of power and energy they could sell to their local clients? Or is it because they were being forced to do that from another vertical?
It's cheap power.
Okay.
Back then, you were selling
Is it cheap?
Back then, we were selling it for 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for wind.
On a model for how long did it take to get it down to that?
For 20 to 25 year terms at 2.5 cents.
Okay.
So, we can talk about this, but it's a not dispatchable resource. You can't control when the wind is happening. You can predict it, though, fairly accurately.
There's so many hours a day, so many hours a year that are estimated that people are carrying for solar days and wind days already, correct?
Yeah.
What are those numbers? Do you remember?
So it's not a certain number of days.
Hours,
throughout the year. What you'll see is there are trends.
Yeah.
So, for example, solar does really well in the middle of the summer and the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Wind does better in the evening and in the wintertime, generally across the country. So you put them together, and they complement each other very well.
Okay. Are there markets in which you could get equal amount of solar and wind at the same time? Different seasons of the year, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can talk about this, but up through the middle of the country, if you combine, it's almost like a recipe. If you combine the highest capacity factor renewable, which is wind, might be up to 50% of the hours of a year you're getting maximum output. And then you put as much of that as you can into the jar, and then you put as much solar as you can into the jar, and that will generate, call it, in the best places, up to 30% plus or minus
That's
of the hours of the year. And then you overfill the jar a little bit. Then for a fixed shape, you can probably get to between 65 and 75% of the electrons that are needed for that flat load just from the renewables alone without any type of storage.
Interesting. And those are on days in which it's either really sunny or really windy.
That's throughout the entire year averaged. So you
Really?
have days where you might not have any. Again, you'd be able to predict in advance that, hey, we're not going to have any power that day.
So we're going to run on engine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What all does Apex consider clean energy other side of wind and solar? Are there any other alternatives?
Right now, our mandate is limited to wind and solar and storage.
Okay.
Now, we're always exploring other things. We've looked into, we've looked at SMRs in the past and are continuing to evaluate that technology, which is interesting because now with this huge jump in electricity demand, people are finally investing in the technology again.
What is it that you're finding on SMRs? Anything worth sharing?
I think we're still at the beginning of the exploration. But I can't speak for the company on SMRs. Personally, I think that the technology is very intriguing. It's advancing rapidly. Nuclear technology has been here for years and runs safely. Personally, if you ask me, do you think that this is part of the resource mix in the future? I'd say absolutely.
What percentage? Hard to say?
Can't tell you.
Well, it's going to scale over the course of time. The adoption rate's not going to be a flight switch, right? So it's going to be from something that there's a lot of propaganda that's been out there that said that this is really, really bad for us. And now there's a lot of people who are like, maybe it's not as bad as some of the other things we thought, right? That's what happens with technology. The beauty about technology is it makes everything transparent again, right? So the technology gives us more visibility and access into certain things. I'm not sure if you're into a bourbon guy, but it's really cold outside today, and I figured this would keep us warm.
I brought the chill with me from Virginia.
I got him out of the gym this morning. It was snowing. I'm like, this is Austin, Texas. I don't live for that.
That's good bourbon.
Not bad, right? So we had the Horse Soldier guys on the podcast not so long ago. They'll be heavily invested into some of the things that we're doing. Veteran groups, we try to support them all inside the industry and out. But going back, I really want the objective of this podcast, right, is to educate. Some of them are more for entertainment. Some are for inspiring, like the guys from Horse Soldier Bourbon. But in this case, every one of us that's in this industry is impacted from energy. Even as consumers of technology, we're impacted by energy, right? I don't think people understand. They know that there's a huge problem. The existential threat, as Dean Miles would always call, or Dean Nelson would always call it, the existential threat being power. And and there's such a massive need and demand for it, right? So I'm all over the place in these questions because I'm hoping to kind of frame something out here that we can fill in together, okay? But you started in, your company was in 2009, 2011. You guys get your first program. You're doing 300 megs of a wind farm in Tulsa or some shit. At what point were you seeing yourself finding additional clients than just the utility provider? And what point did you start getting involved with and having to pay more attention to the data center industry?
That probably emerged at around 2015. We started to see a lot of corporate buyers. I think Google probably led the pack. They did a lot of the early renewable energy transactions.
And what would they do? They buy a PPA that says, hey, we're going to buy power from you. And then they go to the utility provider and be like, we bought arbitrarily 300 megs of renewables or clean. So it's not necessarily the cheapest form of energy. It's probably a little bit more expensive, right? But it's the renewable. So the carbon footprint is really what you're targeting when you buy it, right? Yeah. So how does those hyperscalers make those energy purchasing decisions? And just educate us a little bit on that.
Most of them historically have been what they call virtual power purchase agreements,
yes,
VPPAs.
Virtuals.
And they happen in areas of the market, RTOs, ISOs, places where you have a liquid market. So much of the country, you can sell power into the grid and they'll pay you for it. The price moves up and down all the time, depending on supply and demand. But you have a market there that you can sell power into.
Deregulated energy markets only or any state of the union?
Even regulated energy markets. Virginia is in the PJM market, which has a wholesale power market. As a generator, you don't need to sell it to Dominion. You don't need to sell it to a corporation. You could just sell it right into the market if you wanted to and have a revenue stream.
You can do that?
Yep.
Just as long as you adhere to whatever the requirements are for emissions and whatever the authority.
Reliability. They can tell you to curtail if they don't need the energy. Turn it off if you're going to melt down the grid.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know how much into detail you want me to go, but I could spend a few minutes.
Take us to the church. I mean, listen, this is a complicated topic, which is why we have a long version podcast. So you could take the time you want to help us try to assume that there will be some people here, they'll remember what you told them. Some will just remember how you made them feel when you told them shit, and they're going to go back and look back on their own and do some research. Either way, let's give everyone enough information to arm themselves, because there's people that work for construction and delivery teams right now. And the product, when we first started in this industry, was a megawatt here, 5 megawatts there, maybe 10 megawatts this month or that month. And now everything's a minimum of 100 megawatts. And the product isn't just 4 walls, a roof, and a bunch of, MEP equipment. Now it's the power plant, the distribution of that power and transmission of it as well. So a data center now isn't what it used to be. Now it's the power that goes with it. So now we have to have these conversations, which brings your industry, which is way more mainstream. The energy vertical is one of the oldest. I mean, Rockefeller himself was one of the first pioneers of industry, being one of the first captains of industry standardizing on petroleum, right? So this is what the basis of our entire global economy is. And we're talking about shifting away from that based on the adoption rate of emerging technologies. The demand of energy is outpacing our ability to deliver it based on the way that we do, which is not necessarily clean. So we're going to have to pivot to something that's safer, more sustainable, more scalable, more reliable. And we're talking about using renewables as we swing from fossil fuel, dirty coal, whatever it is that we use to make power plants, right? As an example, we're talking about this from a technology basis. At the end of this, we may even talk about it from a national security basis. We have China that has put and commissioned 10 nuclear reactors every year for the last 3 years, with the exception of last year, which I understand they did 11. And they'll still build 100 new coal power plants this year in China because they just don't care about. They care about infrastructure, right? And large manufacturing for the most critical program ever built is coming back to America. It's built in modules, component level, but we build modular data centers here in the United States, and we build the sky for the cloud and the home for AI. So you're from Virginia, which is the sky for the cloud. The home for AI is where we're at today, and that's in Texas. Texas, because of a lot of things that we'll talk about, is going to have the greatest advantage in AI, right? And energy is going to be the biggest prohibitor or enabler for that level of growth. We have to solve for short-term needs of energy, and as well as talk about how do we educate everyone in this industry to understand what the stepping stones look like to get us from where we're at today to what's going to be more prevalent in energy moving forward. And I don't know what that is going to look like. So when you're like, I could go deep, go as deep as you want to, and I'll shut up.
So much to talk about right there.
So that's what I'm saying. So go nuts.
Start with the beginning, where we've been, then we can talk about maybe where we think we're going.
Yeah.
Where we've been are these VPPAs where, again, you have a power market, covers most of the country, one market or another, except for parts of the West and parts of the Southeast. So Illinois, you can sell power into a market. Virginia, you can sell power into market. These markets are pretty amazing. Every generator, sometimes substations actually have nodes on the market. And for every node, you're basically competing to sell power. So you bid your price. If they need 5 megawatts, they'll select the most cost-effective 5 megawatts, basically. That auction happens every 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's always going.
Okay.
In most markets. And so we have this liquid power market where we always know we're going to be able to get revenue. The way people started buying renewable energy, corporations directly from renewable projects, is through this market. We were enter into an agreement where it had a fixed price, typically for 15 to 20 years, and they would guarantee that price. We would sell the power into the market. If it was less than that price, then they would pay us. If it was more than that price, then we'd pay them. It's a financial hedge. On the other side, they have a data center that's pulling power out of that wholesale market. It's being sold to them through their utility, who's buying it from that same pool. So the electrons are going into the pool, the electrons are going out of the pool. In addition to the power, they're getting a renewable energy credit, which basically says you own 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy from this other project. And they're basically attaching it to the power that they're buying at the other side. It's the best they can do because many of these are regulated markets. They can't buy power directly from a generator in these markets. They have to go through the market. Or in certain other states, the utilities are actually being very proactively working with their customers where they're saying, okay, we'll buy the power from this project that you've pointed us to, and we'll sell it to you through your retail service. That's called sleeving. So most PPAs between renewable energy companies and generators have either been through that market, through the pool, or directly sleeved through the utility.
Okay, keep going.
So moving forward, what we're starting to see is with all of this demand growth, there's a need for real power solutions.
Well, walk me through what one looks like.
Okay.
Don't care who the hyperscaler is. Are you selling directly to hyperscalers now and as well? You don't have to name them, but
historically, most of our customers were utilities. Now, most of our customers are tech companies, some industrial companies outside of that, and then we still do, of course, work with utilities.
how does that work? So how would a technology company get a VPPA through you, and what do they do with that? Walk us through and educate us on that process. So what's that benefit to them? Why are they doing that?
Yeah. Say you are building a data center in a market, say it's Illinois. You would go look for, and you wanted to buy green electricity. You would look for projects in that market that can sell into that same pool. And in southern Illinois, that pool could also be in Iowa and certain other neighboring states that are part of the same power market. You would probably go to some type of an advisor to run a competitive process. They would reach out to all of the developers who are developing generation in that footprint. They would run a competitive auction. You'd send in a price for a 15-year contract, and then they would have a short list where they would not only evaluate price, but certainty. No one wants to sign a deal that's not going to
The
happen.
cheapest price, but they can't be consistent and reliable.
Yeah.
So is it kind of a bake-off? I mean, whoever could offer the lowest price of KWH over the shortest, maybe the longest total contract duration wins?
I'd say that it starts off with that. What's the lowest cost quality megawatt hour you can buy that's actually going to get done? Again, no one wants to go back to their board and say that deal I proposed to you, it actually didn't happen. That's a bad moment. So this certainty is a big factor there. As some of the more sophisticated buyers have built up energy teams, they'll still run competitive RFPs, but they'll also engage in bilateral discussions. So they know what a competitive market price is. They know what a good project looks like on that market. They'll run RFPs to make sure that they have a market check periodically, but they'll also engage bilaterally.
Meaning they could go talk to anybody they want to, the utility provider or the people that were supplying the utility provider with renewables, like you guys.
That's right.
So let's say they came to you and they were like, hey, man, we need arbitrary number 100 megawatts renewables. How does that work after that? What is that person? It's a hyperscaler. They just bought 100 megs or 500 megs from you. and you now are triggered to go build infrastructure to support 10, 12, 15, 25 years, however long the contract duration is, to provide whatever it is. If it's renewable, then it's your job to go put enough renewable online where they could get as much as they need to, up to 500 megawatts as the arbitrary example, at 2.5 cents per kWh or whatever the arbitrary example is for prior on that rate table at that time. And then they lock that in for 15 years or whatever it is, no annual escalators on that. It's just, okay, so, and then how long do you have from the time that you got to be able to deliver that power? And are you delivering that power directly to them, or are you selling that power into the utility pool and they're buying it from the utility pool based on your VPPA?
All good questions. So most of the projects that they're selecting are already well under development for several years. We will have secured the land that we need. We'll have set up towers to measure the energy resource. We'll have started to go through the interconnection queue and have good certainty on what our cost to interconnect will look like, and the timeline for that. We may have gone ahead and procured some long lead items to lock in the schedule, because most of these contracts have guaranteed dates whereby you need to have it all online or you start to pay damages.
Yeah, how long is the average? I mean, how long does it take to build one of these power plants typically, a renewable power plant?
It might take, depending on the market, anywhere from 4 to, gosh, we have some projects that are 15 years under development. That's
Why is that?
Not the norm.
We're
but,
screwed. That's why I'm like, this
that's not
industry
the
will
norm.
never be able to survive on renewables. That's why we can't, right? So like,
Yeah.
it takes too long.
But we already have so many that are well into development that have permits that are there ready to go.
What takes so long? Is it just regulation? I mean, how is China able to flip on a switch and go build 100?
It's regulation in the interconnection process.
Well, what if they have no desire to have an interconnection because they're going to self-generate for themselves?
You can hugely compress the time in most areas.
Okay. Like when you say hugely by percentage base, how much?
We were looking at a project the other day that entered the PJM probably 8 years ago. They're going to get hit with upgrades that will probably require another 5 or 6 years just to build the transmission infrastructure to accommodate the project. If you could skip all of that, you could theoretically develop the project in probably 3 or 4 years.
But it's transmission. It's not generation plant. It's the transmission to get it to another place. You can feed it to the other places.
And the process to go through that transmission queue. Here's the thing is back in 2009, you could go through the queue very easily. There weren't that many projects applying, and it was very straightforward. Now you have tens and tens of gigawatts that are trying to get into the transmission system.
So that's tens of whatever.
Hundreds
These
of
are
gigawatts.
interconnection requests. People want to connect to the grid.
From generators.
And so that's what's holding it up, is they're not just looking to generate power. They're trying to get it back onto the grid, and that's what's taking it so much longer.
And they're trying to study all of these projects at the same time and say, what are the upgrades implied by all of these projects, and what's the allocation amongst you all? It's a very, and we bitch about it all the time, but it's a very difficult process that
How do
does
they
take a long
handicap that?
time.
Yeah, how do they hedge that? How do they know, like, it's going to take me 5, 7, whatever years before I have this up and running? I sold this contract to a hyperscaler. So they're buying it now knowing they're not going to get it for 5 years?
We'll wait to sell it to them until we have visibility there. So by the time we enter into PPA, it might be 1 or 2 years before we start construction or go online. We've already gone through that process largely.
But what's initiating you to spend money on design, allocating the land, doing all these things? You have to. What's the process? So they come into you and you're like, hey, listen, we can do this. We'll go buy the land. We'll go do all these things. We'll do all this shit and have it up online for you in arbitrarily 5 years. Do you have to can it work like that? Or do you have to say, look, I already own this land. I already have my permits where I can build these things. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to feed these different substations that feed this other shit. My thing is your company someone that goes and builds that stuff without a lease backing you up? Or do you have to wait until you have a lease to go do these things?
We'll wait till we start with the lease. We'll get the land first. We'll almost complete development. We'll get it right till the very end. Then we'll find a buyer, a PPA,
Okay.
to generate the revenue, and then we'll go build it.
So you kind of get it ready. So it's plot ready.
Yeah.
You move some dirt. You have it purpose built or purpose laid out for this power station.
We have high confidence in the economics and the timeline by the time we sign a PPA.
So the time that what's an entire process for a renewable energy power plant take on average?
So you'll start off with land acquisition. In certain parts of Texas, that could be one landowner. In other places, it could involve, I think we've had projects with 300 landowners in it.
So say these landowners already have land. Now what?
Say we sign leases with all of them.
You would do it. You would sign leases with the landowners, even though they don't have shit. You just want to get the lease of the land and say, I'm going to put power on it, and you get paid from it.
First thing we do is we get the land.
Okay.
If you don't have the land, then you don't have anything to invest
Do you have
in.
to own the land, or can you lease the land?
We lease it.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're just going out there and saying, hey, you have perfect land for us to build a power plant there. We want to lease that land. It's going to produce this, and when it does, we'll give you a percentage of it.
We'll give you a royalty.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And annual payments until it comes online.
No shit. So you guys are still paying that landline, and they pay that landlord until it comes online,
Yeah. Yep.
and that could take 5+ years.
Yeah.
So they're sitting around going, either way, I can't lose.
I'm getting paid, and by the way, I get to keep using my land.
Yeah.
A lot of our landowners are farmers and ranchers.
Yeah. Where do you get this land from? I mean, like, where are some of the states that are most prevalent for you to play in?
We're very active in Texas and Illinois, Iowa. Done a lot of work in Oklahoma in the past. That's for wind. As
Yeah.
you start to look into solar, the
Arizona.
solar resource is more spread out. The wind is really strong in the middle of the country, and it kind of peters out as
Yeah.
you get to the edges. Solar is a pretty good resource throughout the southern parts of the United States, and as you get further north, the solar resource drops off.
Yeah.
So for solar, more than resource, you're looking for land and interconnection capacity. In many cases today, we start off with the interconnection capacity. We have a transmission team. We'll do injection studies into the grid. We'll figure out how much energy do we think we can inject into that point, and then we'll go get land for the solar project. Because if you can't get onto the transmission system, then you're not going to have a project in many places.
Interesting. So again, going back, if you're doing it to the grid provider, you're going out and you're getting land, saying, "Hey, we're going to do this." The grid provider's like, "Listen, if you build that, we'll take it out. We'll need that power in 5 to whatever years it is," and they're going to sign a lease with you for some sort of shit because they need as much renewables as they could probably get in their.
Yeah, typically we'll sign with the landowners 5 years ahead of time. We'll get into the queue. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 years to get through all the studies to tell you what you're going to need to build to come online. Hopefully it's nothing. Maybe you need to build a
Who
substation.
runs the studies? Where's the study governed from?
The same groups that run the energy markets, the RTOs, regional transmission operators, or the ISOs, independent system operators. So if you've heard of PJM,
Yeah.
PJM is ISO. They manage all of the interconnection studies, and they also manage the power market.
Where are they based out of?
They're based out of Pennsylvania.
Interesting. Okay, so they get to play Caesar on who gets an interconnection request, a grid connection request?
Theoretically, it's scientific. They'll do a study, and anybody can get it, but you might be allocated, you might have to build a $300 million transmission line to get your project on, in which case you say, nope, I really don't want to do that. I'm going to go look somewhere else.
All right, so they come in and figure out how to make it best for their community.
That's right.
Okay, so going back, so you're a hyperscaler, not a utility provider, and you're like, hey, they're buying VPPAs years in advance from you, and what are some of those programs look like? And tell us, they're essentially saying we're not going to go to the utility, we're only going to come to you for power.
In most of these markets, they're still getting utility service.
So
they're
walk
still
me
buying
through that then.
So let's say they're still buying power from Dominion for their data center, but they want some control over where that energy is coming from. They want it to be clean. So recognizing that Dominion's buying a lot of power from the wholesale market, they'll go buy power from a generator and feed it into the wholesale market. Again, you can't track the electrons, but they're supplying green energy into the same grid that they're drawing out of.
So they can sell you as much as they're putting into it. Yeah. So people race to go buy those and be like, I mean, do you ever get to those? It's a credit offset, basically, what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
they'll get a renewable energy credit that then they say this represents 1 megawatt hour of green electricity. We're going to add them up. We're going to add up all of the electrons that we've consumed, and we're going to put a REC on top of it.
Interesting. That's an interesting way for the market. I mean, I could see that is a challenge for the market to probably grow and scale too, right? It seems like, is that the most ideal way to go about this, or is it just because there's such a high value dollar and this type of asset that there's no other choice?
It's like a lot of other things. It's complex at first, but once you figure it out, it's not that complicated anymore.
For real?
The way that we transact, and even if with some of our customers where we're doing repeat transactions and we have a form negotiated power purchase agreement, it can be a very quick transaction. There have been some of these that we've done in a matter of weeks once we've locked into an agreed upon price.
What size can you walk through like that? I mean, is that 10 megs? Is that 100 megs?
Doesn't matter. Scales
You
all
can
the
still
way
get
up.
it done in a few weeks?
Yep.
What allows you to have that level of agility then? What's the big difference?
It's all the contracting. How fast can the attorneys work? Once you have the relationship, the first contract may take months, even years to negotiate.
Yeah, because the language is so complex.
All the different provisions. But once you've transacted one time, it becomes much easier to transact the next time.
Which states are you seeing that have the greatest demand of growth for your VPPAs?
Probably Illinois, Texas. Part of it is there's a lot of demand in PJM in the Virginia area, but the cost of renewables is quite high there as well.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see some customers backing off of PJM to look for other markets.
Green ain't green sometimes, you know what I'm saying? Like all these renewables come at a premium sometimes.
Sometimes. If you look back, probably 8 years ago, we were signing PPAs at 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
But were you guys demanding a lot of capital being invested into the front end of that program?
That gave us the return we needed. That's
And
it.
what changed then?
The cost of equipment went up.
Okay, so now
dramatically.
CapEx costs are higher.
Yeah.
So now you guys are guaranteeing not more power, just a little bit more expensive than what it would previously was,
Yeah.
right?
We still lock in, once the project is built, there are no fuel costs. So you can still lock into a flat PPA rate.
And you don't know, that puts the burden on you guys for the fuel then, because that fluctuates pretty well too, right?
It's just O&M cost. It's human cost. We don't have any fuel inputs really to say.
Oh, because you
So
don't.
we can keep a fixed price we could offer a fixed price for the length of the asset for 30 years. We signed a 30-year PPA a couple months ago,
Oh, yeah?
and we can guarantee that fixed price for the full duration.
Now, was that a data center asset or is that a different?
That was a utility asset.
Okay. And so what are their expectations? Like, go back to a hyperscaler again. I'm curious. So they buy it from you and they're laying out a bunch of capital up front, or are they just buying it all as a service? Are they investing?
All as a service.
As long as they sign a leasable contract and they're a credit-worthy tenant, as long as it's at least 10, 12 years at a minimum, probably?
They only pay for the megawatt hours that they get.
Not really. They don't have a guarantee of hey, I'm going to use no less than 20 megawatts or no less than 100 megawatts. They're getting charged only on what they use?
No, typically they get charged for anything that we produce. Which
Okay, so even if they don't use it all, they're still getting charged.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so it's their prerogative to be incredibly efficient and utilize everything they ask for.
Yeah. Or they can sell it back into the market.
They can.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Well, so now we're looking at physical power supply. Remember, those VPPAs all go through the market, all of them. So it's just a financial position.
How long does a whole RFP process on a VPPA take?
Couple of months.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
that
very
about right?
efficient.
Is it like that across the country, or just in Virginia right now, or just Texas right now, or just Illinois right now?
It's really across the country.
They're all about the same?
And some of these RFPs are for all markets, the entire country. We just want proposals from every single market.
Interesting.
Then they'll evaluate them, the ones that are the most economic. They'll choose some buyers have a preference to really buy the electrons in the market where they are consuming powers. Other customers are really looking for 24/7, so they want to generate green electrons for every same hour in the same
Yeah.
amounts that they're consuming electrons. Each customer has a slightly different preference.
So how long have you been in this side of the game?
For 15 years.
So what are the changes that you see in those 15 years? I mean, it seems like it's a pretty complicated shit right now, and you're like, no, it's pretty easy once you figure it out.
Once you
But
figure it out, it's not bad.
yeah, same with data centers. Piece of
Yeah.
cake, right? Once you figure it out, but it takes a little bit of time through immersion to understand. I mean, just the lexicon itself. I mean, there's parts of language I'm sure that you would use that I wouldn't understand based on what you're talking about. And the beauty about bringing these two industries together is your industry colliding to our industry, where the product is now the space power and the cooling and the power that goes with it, is really what's helping bring our industry into the mainstream, right? I mean, electricity was the second utility. It took 46 years before 1 in 4 Americans adopted it in their home,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How long the data center's been around there's 3 different narratives. I've asked, you could ask people how long the data center industry has been around and you'll get different answers. But the reality is the factual one is it started in 1945. First data center ever built was built for and funded by the U.S. government for national defense and intelligence. The first commercial one was in 1953 for the airline industry. And then, I guess some people consider 1994 when Amazon.com launched its website, that's the defining moment of our industry because they probably represent 60% of the internet traffic, right? The thing is we've been here for a long time, and this is a utility. If you add water, the first utility, electricity, the second, connectivity, which was then a copper wire, into a home phone, which took 27 years from the time it was developed before 1 in 4 Americans put a home phone in their house, a phone line. But that copper was the third utility. The fourth was gas. And if you add all 4 of those prime utilities together, you get a fifth utility, and that is the data center, right? So we're talking about these massive commercial, industrial manufacturing plants that manufacture AI and cloud.
Yeah.
So like manufacturing from a wholesale perspective or a component level was outsourced to Asia. Asia represents 2/3 of the world's population between China and India, and they represent 85% of the world pollution. But they also represent 80% of the world manufacturing, except the things that they're manufacturing are going back to America now, and we're using that plus American human labor to build the sky for the cloud and the home for AI. The only problem is we're building these really incredible modular data centers, and we're running out of power. And right now, everything about power is it slows the industry down. Right, power is the critical path to everything right now.
Yeah.
Although it's you would think it's humans, right? Human beings. Think about how much in 15 years you've seen the industry that you're in change. And I would imagine those all 15 years you weren't running face first into the data center industry. I'm sure that the data center industry wasn't your number one client, right? Maybe it is now. But think about like what is it now, by the way? What percentage of your work is just data centers right now?
Probably half of it's data centers, half of it utilities. Now, much of the utility work is still being driven by data centers. Yeah.
The largest volume demanders of energy.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing in your side in those 15 years? What have you seen from the beginning of, hey, we're talking and hey, you had to learn about data centers like I have to learn about energy right now. We all started from somewhere, right? So at what point were you seeing these data centers enough to the pattern was pretty clear and you're like, we're going to have to really invest more into this shit?
We started seeing that many years ago, and that was just traditional cloud data centers. And
it was the hyperscalers or the enterprise engineers?
Hyperscalers, they became the biggest customers in the
and they
entire
would come
industry.
straight to you.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, hey, can you go get us a VPPA? We need some renewables.
They'd set up an entirely separate team. They'd set up an energy team to go pursue VPPAs that was separate from their data center siting teams. Mm-hmm. Now they're having to talk to each other, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it's critical. I'm seeing it all over the place right now. And energy teams talking to data center teams, and they're both, the energy team has been here forever, and they play in the Wild Wild West. We are niche, but we play in the Wild West too. And before we didn't give a shit about utility. That was really the client's problem. Go get your PPA. Go get your whatever. Now the power is the problem of the operator as well, right? So are you seeing the operators leaning in hard too, or just enterprise groups?
Mostly the tenants, the hyperscalers.
Okay.
We've seen some of the enterprise groups. A big challenge is credit. So you're signing up to a 20 or 30-year deal to buy a lot of power. You really need high investment grade credit to do that, which
it limits. It's not like the G1, the Global Fortune 1000 wouldn't all qualify probably, right?
That's right.
It has to be like probably the top 100.
Yeah. And what you're seeing some of the developers doing is getting their tenants to guarantee the PPAs. They're signing on behalf of the data centers. So they're using their customers' credit to facilitate the PPA.
Smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are still servicing a lot of the data center operators.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're like, hey, we're bringing in, it's, when I started, it was FAMGA, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. Now the hyperscalers tend to be like Oracle, IBM, they're still the same, but I think the whole world is chasing less than 10 customers combined, and some of them are baby scalers that make purchasing decisions like hyperscalers, but the others are true hyperscalers, right? Yeah. Are those operators now using the leverage to get access to power or renewable energy as one of their selling features to get people to come to their market over another market? Are you seeing that yet?
Just in markets where we're looking at physical supply right now. So if we're selling into a power pool, then that's still ultimately being bought by the energy
wholesaler
team on the tenant, on the hyperscaler.
They're buying direct.
They're buying direct. I don't see that changing. What I do see changing is especially areas like Texas where they're looking at, hey, we need a power solution here, not just renewable energy, a VPPA, but we need power solution, and we're going to think about co-locating the data center next to the power generator. That's where we're starting to see some interesting combinations.
So are you building these power plants and then operating them yourselves, or you outsource the operations of these power plants?
We operate them ourselves.
Is the goal to operate them indefinitely? But if you're signing 10, 20, 30-year contracts, are you selling these assets long before then to someone else?
In some cases, yes. In most cases, no.
Are you going to stay on and operate them if you sell them?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no, depending on the ultimate buyer.
Okay.
For most of our generation, we are still owning and operating it. In some cases where we sell down, we're still a equity stakeholder in the project, and we're going to be the long-term owner and operator of the project. So our goal is, especially on some of these projects with key customers, we like the long-term relationship. Like I said, the second transaction is a lot easier. Well, the third and the fourth are even better. By the fifth, you can start to get creative and do some really cool things.
But are you trying to maintain these assets, or are you keeping them on? Are you trying to get them off your books over the course of time?
We're trying to maintain them.
Okay, really? So you guys are trying to build a fleet of power stations then?
Yeah, exactly. So we're operating, I think, just over 2 gigawatts right now.
Just in the U.S.?
That's right.
What percentage of those 2 gigs is for data centers, do you think?
Oh, boy. I'd say probably half of it.
Okay, so you got about a gig. And you have a crystal ball, and you're reading the tea leaves, right? And you do some linear trending. You could connect the dots over the last 4 or 8 quarters and then draw a straight line. What are you projecting for AI demand for energy? What is your sector of the industry preparing for right now?
You know, I wish I could give you a number. What we're just planning on is developing some big projects that can be options for them. But the projects that we're looking at are multi-gigawatt projects in scale.
So there's a Goldman Sachs report from last September, I think, that said that there's 45 gigs of renewable energy. Yeah, 45 gigawatts of renewable energy going to hit the grid between now and 2030. 27 gigs, or roughly 60% of that, will just come from natural gas, and the rest will be solar and wind, and then a little bit of thermal. Hydrogen, I think is the. Are you guys dabbling in hydrogen at all right now, or no?
We're looking at hydrogen. The regulations behind hydrogen, the incentives are still not clear. Hopefully, we'll get some clarity this year, in which case there would be some opportunities to move forward. We've worked on some hydrogen projects in the past. Interesting case study, we worked with a green hydrogen producer to co-locate a wind project with a green hydrogen electrolyzer a couple of years back.
What's that? What's a green hydrogen electrolyzer?
It takes wind energy and water and splits it into hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay, for like a storage component?
So
you could transport it or so? I don't know.
This company is supplying green hydrogen primarily to customers who use its fuel cells for logistics centers. So
fuel
forklifts.
cells.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so what's the big play for you? What are you seeing in the industry as a whole? Are you seeing a larger consolidation of focus in Iowa, Illinois, Texas, you said?
It's all over the country.
Where's
right now there's more demand than supply. So whatever the constraint is good projects. How do you get projects across the finish line? Were you in the queue 5 years ago and say you're in a great place right now? That's the biggest constraint. Demand has not been the problem.
What's the demand look like right now? You have a couple gigs online. Would you have a couple more gigs in demand?
Yeah, we have been able to sell power from all of the projects that we're able to realize. So we probably have, 800 megawatts probably just in backlog that are projects that are about to go into construction. A couple of gigs online now, and then there's way more demand than that. From the data center opportunities alone, we're hearing that, hey, we would like to develop a multi-gigawatt data center and have a power supply. What can you do for us?
What's that mean? What's the power supply part?
Directly interconnecting behind the meter renewables to a data center.
So they're going to self-generate, they're talking about.
Self-generation, yeah.
Okay. Are you seeing common requests from people that aren't looking to get an interconnection request? They're just trying to self-generate themselves?
I think everybody that we've talked to would like to have an interconnection request and be able to supply from the grid. As I would suspect you see more constraints on that. And then eventually you'll need to look at self-generating, at least for some period of time.
Until the utility buys their plant from them, probably, right?
Or until they connect wires up there, until they build transmission out into those areas.
All right, so what is the greatest challenge that you have to solve for in this day and age in this industry then?
I think it's getting rid of some of the silos. We've always developed a wind project by itself, a solar project by itself, storage over here.
Just tie them together into microgrid solutions?
Put them together into the power grid, and then the power grid will deal with it. And what we're seeing now is you have large data center demand in areas where you don't have generation supply. They're building transmission, but you might not be able to interconnect for several years. So what do you do? And by the way, they want it online by, call it 2029, 2030. So what do you do? And I think we're in a good position where we have a lot of gigawatt scale projects, as do others in our industry, that we've been investing in for years that can come online in that time frame. The challenge is, where do you have the wind and the solar together? So you can combine them to get to that magic mix of, call it 75% of your energy from the renewables alone. And then what do you do to supplement that so that you can offer a real power solution without having to curtail the data center? A firm, reliable power solution. So that's where we are now is, all right, we have experience with these technologies, wind, solar, and storage. What else can we put into the system that can generate reliability and firm power?
And what's the answer?
I think where we're looking right now, this is really just an exploration of technologies. We would likely bring in a partner into this, but probably gas peakers in the immediate term. Like if you want to bring online gigawatts of generation within the next 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to want to go with something proven, financeable, that is already probably under development, that can combine to generate a firm, fixed shape for you for your power supply. I think it can provide reliability. So we know we can do it with the wind. We know we can do it with the storage.
Talk to me about the storage. What's the storage solution? Because, I mean, now bring us down and educate us a little bit more between those two. You're saying wind is probably the better solution in renewables over solar?
I'd say you need to combine them. If you really want to get that product, let's call it the product, like a high renewables, reliable
high
product.
Efficiency, high reliability.
Low cost, fast, technologically proven, primarily renewable solution. Again, I think you have to stack wind with solar, and you get 75% of the way there, and you need something for reliability. That can be, in the near term, probably gas peakers or battery storage. The battery storage is
what kind of
more
batteries
expensive.
about? Like what?
Lithium batteries.
Okay, gotcha.
Lithium-ion batteries.
Yep.
And I still don't think it's going to get you all the way to the reliability that you need. So the discussions that we're having are about combining our renewables assets with peakers, and you get a very reliable, very proven, low cost, very fast time to power solution.
How do you know all those things? Is this a standard off the product thing that you guys selling like a small, medium, or large there, or is everything that you guys are doing custom?
Everything that we do can be scaled. So we're working on several multi-gigawatt projects out in West Texas right now that have already been under development for quite some time.
What's that mean? They've been under development in terms of design, or they're waiting for
lease acquisition, wind measurement.
Interesting. So how far away are they from being able to turn that into a production environment? If it's in,
I think they can be online by 2029, 2030 at 2 to 3 gigawatts.
That for real. More. And what is the solution of energy there? It's all wind and solar.
All wind and solar, and then with a partner, probably gas peakers.
Gas. Okay, so when you say that, are you talking about diesel or are you talking about natural gas?
Natural gas.
I thought so. All right. So, and you guys consider natural gas renewable on your side too?
On our side, not quite yet, but we also realize that we're going to need to be creative and come up with some solutions. So, partnering with other technologies, I think will be important to coming up with the solutions that we need.
What do you typically partner with now? Like a reciprocating engine, a turbine engine? What do you?
Yeah, right now, it's just an evaluation of the technology. So we're not out there developing a gas plant next to our renewables plants, but evaluating the technologies that could complement it, and then figuring out the partnerships that we want to form around that. In some cases, the companies that are developing the data centers are taking on that scope to build gas generation to complement the renewables.
So what else about this side? Because I feel like it's still very niche within niche, right? And I'm trying to double tap and zoom out a little bit more on how small of, because we're talking about a product that won't really be, it sounds like there's certain markets that it's better for than others. The cold ones are probably not as good for, there's certain parts of the country that are just better for solar and better for wind, right? So because of that, do you see that being a big driving factor because we're going to not have the transmission lines to get the energy that we're generating wherever we arbitrarily want to where the data centers are preferably built. We need to go to where the energy's at, and we need to build data centers in orbit around that, right?
Yeah.
So how is that changing for what you've been already doing over the last, what's in 15 years of what you've been doing this? Tell me what the industry was like and where it's at now.
Historically, we've needed the ability to interconnect into the system to build the project.
Do you really think that's still going to be a fucking driving factor, though? I don't.
I hope not. I don't think so. Here's just another reason. When you look at the size of these data centers and you look at the generation that's required, you're bigger than a lot of utilities that you're trying to interconnect into.
Yeah, you'd be downgrading to sell it to someone else who's going to not probably have the ability to manage it and maintain it as well as you do, and then sell it back to you at a higher rate.
Or even if they could, they're not going to be able to develop all that generation that fast. They're not going to be able to move that fast. Now, you get it up and running, and yeah, there's probably a good reason for everyone to interconnect things,
Yeah.
right, under some framework. But you get it up and running reliably, and then you can worry about the interconnection.
Is the interconnection the number one leading factor for everybody when they make these things? Is that something that's the number one factor for you guys before you lease, or is it just the creditworthiness of the tenant?
Historically, it's been
Because you want to give it back to the grid?
the whole idea of building something that's not connected to the grid is brand new. Like people
I
have
think
not
it's-
been thinking about it until the past year, probably.
I think it's the only option in some markets.
I
The
agree.
grid's not coming to certain places.
At least not for a while.
Well, that whole side of your guys' market moves like old people. Right? So, like, you know where I was going with that. My thing is, there's people need data center capacity today, right? They're like, look, I need capacity now. I mean, yeah, if I can afford it, I'll lay down deposits for power that I'm going to get in 6 years. I'm just signing a contract, get to work. My thing is there's so much energy demand that's coming our way that I can't imagine people caring about trying to figure out how to get it back to the grid. They just want to have enough to support the reliability of their clients, you know?
Absolutely. If you want to build clean multi-gigawatt data centers with power supply, the fastest way is to find an area with good wind, decent solar, combine them, and put in some type of thermal generation in the event that the wind's not blowing, the solar's not shining, realizing that you'll probably only dispatch that maybe 25% of the time.
And in that time, you're running on natural gas anyway, right? On the
Yeah.
time which you
Yeah.
can't get solar,
Yeah,
wind,
that's right.
you're going to just turn your nat gas engines on, and those are incredibly efficient these days, right? So,
Yeah.
all right, what else? I mean, in 15 years, you've seen some shit.
And
So,
in many cases, the companies developing the data centers already have the expertise to do the gas turbines too, we're seeing.
okay, so they're going out there and making their own little microgrids.
Yeah.
So they bypass you altogether, or
No, we're just the renewables component to it.
so they'll come to you, they'll get a VPPA through you, then they'll go to their local utility provider and get one as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they're connecting to the grid. If not, then, you merge, you take two groups with different expertise. We're good at the renewables. We know what we're doing. We have the assets already, by the way. We're just looking for you to plug in the data center and whatever thermal generation you need for reliability purposes. And then you have the complete package. And by the way, that can be done pretty quickly, given that we're 3 years into development on these assets already.
So you're saying that's quickly, 3 years? Is that fast for you on their side of the game?
Well, again, we're 3 years into the development, so
So another 3 years on top of it, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that about average? You're seeing 5 to 6 years for any typical development on power right now in the U.S.?
it can be a little bit faster. It could be maybe 3 or 4 years in certain parts of Texas, or other places where permitting is more straightforward. Other areas in PJM, it could be easily 8 years, and longer depending on your interconnection studies.
Who does those studies? You get to hire a third-party objective that does that, or are you just doing them on your own and then submitting them and saying this is how we did it?
No, we'll do the studies to replicate exactly how they're going to do the studies, to preview them, to say, all right, here's how they're going to study it, here are the results. Then we go actually apply, knowing that we think that we're going to have a clean bill of health.
Do you have your own design team in-house that does the design per whoever the AHA is that says that works or that doesn't?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So do you take that same team to every market that you go to, or do you have to go to some market and find a team that knows the local rules there?
I think with in-house, we have the capability to manage most markets without bringing in third-party consultants.
All right. Well, look, like I said, double tap out, zoom out a little bit again. What are some of the trends that you've seen since you've, in 2015, in the last 15 years, since 2010, I guess it'd be 2011. Walk us through some of the things that you've seen and then how that's got you out of Virginia and all these other states.
Yeah, we really started in Oklahoma, was our first project.
Really?
Yep.
And that was 300 megs, you said?
300 megawatts.
For a substation?
300 megawatts for
Utility
the
provider.
utility.
Okay.
Yeah. And at that time, utilities were the only buyers. Development was pretty straightforward. The interconnection queues were clean. We've seen happen over time, and I think there are probably parallels, the data center industry, probably in other industries too. I looked at that movie, Nuclear Now.
Oh, it's a great movie,
There
isn't
was a
it?
section on the opposition.
Did you watch it?
I did. I watched it.
Okay. I recommend that to everybody that really doesn't understand the dichotomy between nuclear weapons and nuclear energy.
There was that whole section on the rise of the opposition.
Sierra Club and Jane Fonda, all
That
that.
echoes a lot of parallels with what we've seen over the past 15 years.
Not in my backyard, not over there either. It's stupid shit.
The rise of opposition that is well funded and well organized by large companies.
Yeah.
Even though it looks like it's grassroots.
No, it's not. I think
It's
U.S.
not.
AIDS, I think the Doge has found like half the protests that we've seen on TV regarding anything was funded by U.S. Aid anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, these aren't, even now, you could see that, we're ripping off Band-Aids in government, and you can see that there's people that are freaking out, and then you can see people like, why are you getting mad? We're just ripping the Band-Aids off and figuring out where all the waste is at. But because they were part of the waste, that's probably why they're upset. But there's so much waste, right?
Yeah. But the amount of money going into like seeming grassroots groups and misinformation campaigns,
Yeah,
those are the things that go in that Nuclear Now. Maybe we've experienced that too.
Oh, have
over
you
the past
really?
15 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
How do you fight
that's an
that?
uphill battle.
I'm so surprised they're coming after you guys. You guys are the renewable solution. You guys should be the ones that all the tree huggers. I'm a tree hugger. All of us should be trying to be like, let's get down. That's so much better than what.
Well, it's not the Sierra Club, but it's the same groups. It's the oil and gas companies that funded that campaign.
Oh, yeah,
They're
yeah.
also funding opposition in renewables.
Hold on. So let's put a pin on that so people understand what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's people that make a bucket of money on oil and gas, and they would hate to lose that to renewable solutions or more economically efficient or cleaner, more safer, or more sustainable solutions that they offer. Because, well, quite frankly, I look at like the healthcare industry, man. The cigarette companies all started buying all the food companies, and then the pharmaceutical companies as well. So they're like, we can make the food that makes them unhealthy, and then we just give them drugs that don't fix the problems. They just treat the symptoms, and no one really gets healthy. We just kind of continuously create this loop where it's a self-sustaining model. And I could see this where you guys are trying to get out there because I think that your community citizens, I think the humanity in general would prefer to see how we could have renewable, cleaner energy across all fronts. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, our landowners are willingly signing into leases because they want it there.
Yeah.
These are farmers and ranchers, and it's a great revenue stream for them. And it's a huge new property tax base for the local community. You've seen this in data centers too. So it's a great thing. And so we've had to learn how to navigate the opposition, which is a problem in probably any form of energy generation. You can have some form of
They got
opposition.
big money. They got big money. Some of these biggest companies in the world are those groups, and they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at you guys to probably try to suppress renewables as much as they can, right?
Yeah, that's one trend. And then the second trend is the interconnection queues and the amount of projects trying to get in. And we've seen that on the generation side. I don't know if you've seen it on the load side yet, right? But it seems like it's the same dynamic where you have all this data center development and they're filing load interconnection requests. And eventually the queues are going to get so clogged that I think they're not going to know what to do or how to handle it.
I think the way that they're managing that is they're raising the application costs for those queues, right? So like I was looking at something. We have a client in Austin, a big landowner with a developer that we introduced, and there's some big things they're getting ready to do. And we've learned that like to get these studies moved along, sometimes you got to throw a lot of money at it. Like the city of Austin was like, look, if you guys want that study, it's $300,000. You can't commit to something unless you have that study. We'll do it for you, but it's $300,000. It takes 6 months. And you're like, well, I don't want to spend $300,000 to find out that the bad news is not going to be accretive to what I'm doing. They're like, well, they're just like throwing money and barriers up there to, like, it's incredible how challenging and how complicated the energy world is relative to how nimble and how agile the data center world has been. It's completely, it's probably necessary because our industry is going to speed up the energy vertical and change the many of the bad habits perhaps, but at the same time, the energy vertical is pretty sophisticated and mature, and they're going to teach the emerging wild west of the data center industry how to be institutionalized as an industry that could scale. Because right now, look at Northern Virginia. The entire state is built like Swiss cheese. I mean, there's pockets here and pockets there and pockets there. And now you have groups that are trying to go out and do master plan communities of 2,000 acres at a time, building 1 gigawatt because we're trying to make it more efficient and how we roll these things out, right?
Yeah. And there are other demands for the electricity now too. I mean, reshoring more industries building up in the United States. It's creating
Like
demand
manufacturing?
growth. Manufacturing. Vehicle electrification a little bit, not so much as people might think. Weather, hotter summers, colder winters, that's generating more need for electricity at certain times of the year. So it's not just data centers. There are other things driving these constraints. It's probably being led by data centers.
I thought that I read a
There's
report
lot
that
of
said the
demands.
largest demand of energy comes from residential homes because you have everyone plugging into the walls. That's when everyone's watching their movies and doing their laundry and doing their food. And now you have a lot of really sophisticated technology, like your refrigerator. You'd be like, yo, you just ran out of butter. You want me to, you know what I'm saying? So like,
Yeah.
I think I could see applications of energy like solar as an example shifting to more residential requirements. It makes more sense at that application level, don't you agree?
Yeah.
It's harder to put together enough solar to support a data center, but you can put enough solar on a roof to support a home.
Depends on where you are, right? If you're out in the middle of the country, there's a lot of land out there. We
Yeah,
are
but-
like blessed in that we're not land constrained. We are not renewable resource constrained, but it's not where the population centers are. So yeah, the idea that you're going to build enough solar for a 500 megawatt data center in an urban area, it's not going to happen.
No, reliability is still number one thing in data centers.
Yeah.
Reliability has to be number one still, right? So what else are you seeing?
Well, I think that's one thing that we're getting up to speed on is the
Is
need
the
for
resistance?
reliability and how you accomplish it. Other trends we're seeing are we had to navigate inflation and dramatic increase in cost for several years. Our
Yeah,
costs have
supply
probably
chain
gone
stuff.
up. I mean, the cost of building a wind project is probably up at least 50%.
For
maybe
real,
more.
what is that? Is that the lead time on transformers? Is it because you have more copper, stainless steel?
Labor, copper, steel,
labor.
concrete. Yeah.
Interesting. Is it hard to find labor now in your sector?
I think it's being managed. I mean, there's always a labor need. Like our industry is hiring a lot of people, especially in construction and operations.
Okay.
But we're able to navigate it. We're able to build very large projects in very rural areas successfully.
What's the large project for you guys?
Large project is probably, and it's ticked up over time, right? 300 megawatts was huge back when we built that first
Still
project.
big. Still big.
Now we're looking at 500 megawatt projects. We're working on a project in West Texas that's 5 gigawatts of wind and 3 gigawatts of solar. And it's going to be a big project.
How long will that project be out there for?
If we can bring together the commercial arrangements, it could be online by probably the end of 2030, maybe into 2031.
And they're on contracts for 20 years, so 2050-ish is okay. So we're talking about.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Is that all data center stuff, you think?
it is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's all data center related.
Have you seen a difference between the uptick of like Bitcoin mining or things like that as well, the miners?
There has been an uptick. They're typically looking for really cheap power.
Yeah.
So they'll go to a wind project where there's not enough transmission capacity and you're basically having to sell at $0 a megawatt hour or $1 a megawatt hour. And they'll try to buy the energy during those really cheap times of the day or the year, really low cost energy. And then most of them are fairly thinly capitalized, so we haven't been able to find the credit that's needed to support a long-term offtake from them.
No, that makes way more sense. Some of those groups don't stick around very long, huh? What is some of the other? Tell me what like a Nirvana program looks like for you. Like, what are some of the types of program requests you guys are getting right now? What's the small, medium, large ranges, and where are some of the markets that you're seeing most of the demand being pent up at?
Again, there's demand across the country for the VPPAs. If you can get a
You're
project
so vague,
done,
man. I keep asking these questions, and you're painting with the broadest stroke.
We're seeing a lot. In PJM, Virginia, if you can get a project across the finish line at a low cost, you'll have a buyer there. All right, you'll have a competition to buy the power.
So Virginia.
Virginia, that whole market, it's called the PJM market, goes from northern North Carolina up to New Jersey over to Illinois. That kind of triangle there.
What does that PJM stand for?
Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland.
Okay,
That was
so
the
it's
original
whatever
market.
grid is just for them
And
all
it's
together.
expanded over time to include Ohio and Indiana and Illinois.
Oh, really? Because Indiana, I thought, would feed into the same one that's like ComEd for Chicago and.
Well, ComEd's part of the PJM system.
Oh, got you. Okay, so
I mean, you can think about it as all the utilities owned all of their transmission lines at one point in time. And they said, well, let's form a group to manage all of this for reliability so we're not a bunch of feudal states, operating inefficiently. So
Yeah.
they created, PJM,
Which manages the transmission?
which manages all the transmission, and then they expanded to all of these other states.
So they're a little behind on transmission these days, BJM, right?
Yeah, they've had a huge uptick in growth. They were doing okay for a while, but now there's a lot of demand on their system.
Who owns those groups? Is that owned by the city? Is it owned by BlackRock? I mean,
It's a nonprofit owned by the utilities, basically.
okay, so all the utilities own a part of this.
They're members, right? It's a not-for-profit that's there to maintain reliability on the grid. And when you request a load interconnection study, in many cases, I think it's being run through that RTO. It's ultimately the studies are being managed by the utility in partnership with that RTO, but that will have some implications on your load service request too, because eventually you're going to be drawing power from outside of that Dominion utility system.
What are some of the things about this energy aspect of what we do in renewables that are misunderstood? Like there's just a bad rep for that. Anything like that? I mean, what are some of the things that you could recorrect our mindset of how we view things, or some of the things that you could educate us on?
I think the idea that renewables don't generate all the time, and it's like the idea that people don't know that. We know that. We know that solar operates 30% of the time and wind up to 50% of the time. That's all baked into the economics. So when we say something costs, call it $50 a megawatt hour, it already reflects all of that.
Do those things really pencil out? I was watching Landman with Billy Bob Thornton. Have you seen that show,
Yeah,
by the way? It's
I have.
fantastic. And he's talking to his lawyer, and she's asking about the solar farms. Or no, it was the wind farms. And he's like, these things never pay for themselves, over the course of time. It takes 10, 15 years for X, Y, and Z. Is that about true? I mean, have you watched any of that stuff? And
Yeah, there's probably about a 10-year payback period. Think about it, if you build an office building, a 10-year payback period is great. You're going to operate it for 35 years, and then at the end, we'll probably still have the interconnection facilities. You'll repower it, build it again, better turbines.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's it's the cost of energy from these projects in Texas. You're probably looking at $50 to $60 a megawatt hour, but you can guarantee that price for as long as the asset's alive. It could be 15 years, it could be 30 years.
Well, what is the future of renewables?
I think the future of renewables is there is transmission development happening now, but renewables need other forms of generation. I don't believe that there's a one magic generation type that's going to fix everything and represent our entire grid. I personally believe in technological diversity, wind, solar, storage. I'm looking at nuclear and trying to learn about it. I'm looking into enhanced geothermal and trying to learn more about it.
Are there certain markets that's more favorable than others? Advanced geothermal,
Advanced
like
geothermal.
Wyoming?
I think the big projects that are happening now are in Utah
Yeah.
right now. But I was listening to a podcast with a company called Fervo that's developing. They're basically taking an existing drilling technology for fracking, and they're saying, can we go deeper and into granite and access new geothermal resources that we haven't before?
Interesting.
And they're finding some success. So that's just one example. This huge boom in demand is generating a lot of investment in technologies that have been sitting on the sidelines for years.
What kind of technology specifically, like batteries?
Nuclear, geothermal, batteries, maybe new types of solar solutions, though we're not really tracking those. Those are the ones that I've been looking at the most.
So what are the things that make it difficult for people to make purchasing decisions and buy a VPPA from you? Because they're hedging, this is locking in a price for them, but the price could go way down below that, and they don't even know that yet, right?
It could.
Okay.
It could also go way up.
And then you guys are messed up. Yes.
If it goes way up, we're fine because we're hedged. It just means that they're basically making money off of their VPPAs.
Okay.
Rather than paying for the energy in the RECs, they're getting a check every month. And some of the old PPAs that we signed, they are definitely in the money, and the counterparties are making money off of those agreements.
Really?
Others, they're having to pay a little bit more. And they're getting the renewable energy credits, which have some value, and they're using that to clean up their traditional energy supply. So they're fine with it.
Well, what is the pitch? What are you going to these? If you were sitting down and you had, the bigger ones now are AWS and Microsoft and Google and Oracle and IBM and SoftLayer or whoever, you go through the list of these big cloud providers. Who are the groups? What do you tell them? You're like, hey, listen, doesn't matter where you go. We can go with you. We'll build a power plant for you. I mean, what do you tell them?
For the co-location.
Both,
Okay,
enterprise
for
or colo.
VPPA, they are all very sophisticated on it now, but back when they were not, what you would do is they typically would have some mandate to try to clean up their energy supply.
They're saying, hey, by this date, I'm going to have 25% of my energy is renewable or some shit. Right?
And you'd say, hey, you're in this market. Let me tell you about how the market works. You can buy the renewable energy credit. You can have a hedge on your energy price for most of, until...
Tell people what that means, though, how they're just buying the credit. They're not really buying.
Yeah. Well, on the VPPA, they're getting the credit, but then they're also getting the energy hedge.
Okay, but it doesn't know where that energy's come from. Like you said, you don't know where the electrons come from. On the other side, though...
But you can't track it. So, if you're buying electrons and putting them into the pool and then you're pulling out the same amount of electrons on the other side of the pool.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's the same with any power generation. You don't know where coal electrons are going.
Yeah, I got you.
And so in the VPPA, they get the renewable energy credit and then they get the energy hedge. And so you have a hedge on your energy price for 15 years, typically at a very good price relative to the market. And by the way, you get to claim that it's green power because it is green power, and then you're pulling it out of the other side.
Okay, and then is there a credit that comes with that as well?
No, just when the electron is generated, they get the renewable energy credit.
So what's the sales pitch to these people? They're just being good citizens as they do this, or are they actually getting some economic efficiencies?
Historically, they've been locking into very good priced energy. If you look at the VPPAs that have been signed starting in, I'd call it 2022 and before inflation really hit, those guys, they signed up to very good energy prices for a very long time.
What were the size increments that they were buying into? What's the minimum size?
Minimum size that we've looked at, typically you'll need an anchor tenant of probably 100 megawatts. So translating that into megawatt hours.
It's okay.
Right here.
Don't worry about that.
100 megawatts, and then sometimes we've worked with aggregations where they have other suppliers, and we'll bring them in for smaller units, 15, 20 megawatts.
So let's say I'm cloud provider X. I come in, I'm like, dude, I'm going to do your 100 megawatts. I'm going to sign up. How long does it take? I'm in Texas. How long does it take before I get my power?
Well, you'll look at the stage of the project. It depends on who you're talking to. There are groups out there signing PPAs for projects that are 5 or 6, 7 years out. For us, and I think most of the more sophisticated developers, you're going to wait till you have certainty on the PPA. So you're going to sign up, and probably within 1.5 to 2 years, you're starting to buy power from that project.
So it takes that amount of time. And do they have a ramp up that, like, hey, you asked for 100, I'm going to give you 20 megs a month for 5 months or a quarter until we're there. I mean, once you have it online, you're like, I'm charging you for that.
Yeah.
Whether they have a need or demand. And if they don't use it, they can sell it back?
Unless it's negotiated. I mean, it's all negotiated up front. If they say, I'm going to buy 50 megawatts this year, but then, 100 the next year, you can accommodate it. It's just all negotiated up front, set into the PPA, and then it can happen.
But as a rule of thumb, these people need to understand it's 3 to 5 years before they're going to get, if they make a purchasing decision with a renewable group, it's going to take 3 to 5 years before they get it.
Maybe 2 years.
Is that just as fast as a natural gas plant? Or is it?
By the time you develop and build the natural gas plant and get the air permits, I'm not sure. I think it's a little bit beyond that, but.
Are there what are some of the, if I want to do a natural gas generation plant, from what I understand, there's some limitations to how big I could build. Have you dabbled in this side of it yet?
We're starting to dabble in it.
Okay, so let's just say it's 100 megawatts, 150 megawatts tops, right? The largest I can build because of my emission output on natural gas is this many, right? What are the limitations to solar and wind? I can build as much as I want, and there's no limitation. There's no offsetting waste or what are the permits that go into that stuff?
So, there are a handful of permits. With wind, typically you're looking to the FAA to determine there's no hazard to aviation or military airspace. For all of them, you'll have wetlands permits if wetlands are being impacted.
Yeah.
If you are going to threaten an endangered species, then you're going to have a mitigation plan.
Sure.
Not a permit per se, but a mitigation plan. In many localities, they'll have local zoning, and so you'll need to work with locality to get it zoned through a special use permit process, or it could be a state permitting process. Typically, they may not have size limitations, but they'll have setbacks. You can't build within such distance of a structure.
What's the sweet spot then? What is the ideal model that you sell towards? Like, hey, this is a grand slam. Look at this. They have all this space. what is it? What's Nirvana look like? This Nirvana scenario.
I think the Nirvana scenario is that utilities build more transmission and we can continue to work with them. We're happy to sell power to utilities too. And in parallel, we would love to work on some of these large data center projects to combine what we think are kind of unique renewables assets that could come online very quickly, but to provide a solution that they can get comfortable with, that it's reliable.
I understand there's 50 states of the union. Which states are you better at than others?
Oh boy. We've done a lot in Texas.
Okay.
And, if you're looking at islanding a system, it is fairly straightforward to do a private use network in Texas to connect a project directly to a facility without going to the grid.
You call that a private use network?
Yep.
Is that like PUN?
Yep.
Okay, very
private use network.
Okay, so I got it. So that's how they refer to self-generation on-prem for yourself as a PUN.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Texas.
Okay, and is that seems like a pretty fast way to get through things, right? Because you're the supply and the demand.
That's right. Typically, you'll still want to interconnect into the grid if you can, because think about it. If your data center or your factory's not using all the power,
like frequency response on demand type shit, is that what you're talking about?
No, if you're just not using all the power from the generator, it's nice to be able to sell it into the grid.
Yeah, for frequency response, you mean, or like
just for revenue, right? I mean, if you can't use the electrons because they're being generated by the wind or the solar project, and you can't use them on the private use network,
I guess
nice
it would
to
be
able to
like,
sell it into the grid.
Is there a way to do that without compromising the reliability of the campus itself because of that?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be a regular grid intertie. It may not be for the full capacity of the projects, too.
Are you seeing the large enterprise groups that come to you if they're buying 300 megs as a click? Are they trying to get all that back on the grid too? Or are they like, listen, this is for us?
This is all kind of new. When we've done it in the past, the goal has been to be able to get it all onto the grid.
Why is that?
In this case, it was because if the facility was not consuming the power. It could be because it was just down. It could be because it was delayed in construction.
Is it because the finance group is better served if it has a local municipality that's buying that or a local grid provider that's buying it versus?
You have a market. You have that liquid market to sell into.
That's
There's some way
why.
to liquidate the electrons and to make money on them.
Okay. Versus having them self-dedicated for whatever they think the capacity may be. Okay. Because there will be some point there where there will always be waste, right? I mean, like, what do you think the utilization efficiency is of? I would say the cloud people that you're talking about that are armed to the teeth, I'd say they already are in a habit of buying and using between 80 and 90% of, they're utilizing 80 to 90% of what they're buying already. So that margin, remember people would buy 10 megs and then run 3.5 on it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those days are over, right? Now they're running 12 megs, 15 megs oversubscribed to that 10 megawatt backplane. And then they're just getting really creative in how they operate that thing because they're selling if it's a distributed redundant model of some capacity, they're going to sell the 5 nines off the topology that they sign to an SLA on. Then the other pieces, what they're going to do is they're going to oversubscribe it because they know, like, I could sell it if the utilization combination is 30, 40 points, I could sell it twice, and I'm only at 80% utilization efficiency, right? I could oversubscribe,
Yep.
right? So are you seeing these models from these large hyperscalers? Is getting to the grid connection stopping them, I guess, is what I would say? Or are they so focused on just building for themselves?
It's causing them to pause. They want the grid
is.
interconnection for some capacity, but again, I think it's an evolution. The idea of like not connecting entirely to the grid was a crazy idea a year ago.
Was it really?
From the people we talked to, yeah. Again, we're not way out there in the industry. But
I think that's going to be the new standard as we go.
I agree, and people are moving in that direction.
It's already happening. Vantage Data Centers just announced they're getting with VoltaGrid for a gig. So VoltaGrid's got to go buy some gens, and they're going to be on demand. They're as a service. VoltaGrid is they're not selling engines; they're selling energy as a service, right? So they're going out and doing exactly what it is that you're talking about. They're just not doing it with renewables; they're doing it with natural gas engines.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say how it will evolve. I think that I may be misspeaking here, but I think we've done the only large-scale renewable private use network project in Texas so far.
How big
This
was
is
it?
something this was 345 megawatts of wind.
That's big.
So this is something that people are just starting to think about. I think it'll happen. It's like it makes so much sense to me that you would go build these projects, island it, you'd connect to the grid when and if it made sense, but otherwise you're controlling your own destiny and not letting things get in the way. But a year ago, we went out and talked to a bunch of people about that low carbon energy grid, and the same question kept coming back. What about the grid connection? What about the grid connection? And now I think they're still asking about that, but it's not with the sense that it's absolutely required right away. They want some narrative as to how it will ultimately interconnect to the grid.
Man, that's a tough spot, because I would imagine at some point the grid is going to come to them and be like, we want your power anyway. They're going to want to buy it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't make it like something that they had to do. I'm wondering, is there anything else to the patterns of what you're seeing from these large hyperscaler buyers that you're seeing that is consistent?
Scale and speed. I mean, the scale is incredible. People are, a year ago, we're talking to people about 200 megawatt facilities and went up to 500 megawatts. Now it's multi-gigawatt facilities in the span of a few months.
I don't think that people understand, like, a 100 megawatt facility requires, let's just say that's, I don't know, depending on the density, whatever the electrical capabilities are, but you're probably running 1.1 to 1.5 million gallons of water a day, through a system like that. That's about a 35 to 40,000 person city.
Yeah.
In terms of comparison. That's what 100 megawatts is. You'll put 1,400 people to work just building that thing, between the modular side, stick built in the field, and all the trades. And you'll probably have at least 100 people, 80 to 100 people that stay on that campus, that building, that site when you're done. So there's a large economic impact to these programs. So when we're talking about that, people don't realize like what 100 megawatts was, because some people have just gotten the game. They've just been here for a few years and all they know is that. But that's not at all what I mean. I used to work for a couple different operators, and I bet you it took one of them 10 years to get to 100 megawatts combined. And now we're talking about that as a minimum, that we're like, like people don't even get out of bed for less than that now. So I can imagine, like, I don't understand if that's what we're building to, why they give a shit about the grid connection request when they're going to not have enough power even with what they're getting through you already. Does that make sense? And it sounds like renewables is going to have a really hard time staying relevant in what we're doing, because it takes so much time to develop these programs that no one gives a shit. Technology doesn't wait for that. It's not going to wait, right? That's why natural gas will probably solve more than 60% of the renewable type or green or clean energies that we're going to be using instead of diesel.
Well, if a wind or solar project takes 5 years to develop and build in Texas, how long does a gas plant take?
Faster. Way faster. Texas has, I'd love to understand, and I will research now after talking to you, what the landscape looks like for wind and solar in Texas. But I mean, Texas, as you know, a lot of the fiber backbone of the United States was built along the U.S. railway lines, right? So you connect, all the NFL cities together like a hub and spoke through fiber. And that really is the easiest place to run fiber when we were deploying fiber in the early 90s was along the right-of-ways of the railway systems. Mm-hmm. Typically, the advantages was you were only negotiating with one group. Like in Texas, there's the largest landowner in the state of Texas owns a lot of railway line, right? I believe there's more than 10,400 miles of railway line, which means that Texas represents 8% of the railway lines in the United States. So out of all 50 states, about 10% of it is in Texas, which means that's a shit ton of fiber. And it turns out that Texas has the largest collection of renewable energy than any other state of the union, specifically around natural gas, right? So it makes sense that we're going to come this direction, but with so much natural gas and with so many delays in transmission lines from utility, and the interconnection grid providers suck so bad that if you're a technology provider, whether the operator or the enterprise end user, you can't wait for renewables, and they're not gonna. The groups that are buying from you now are those that don't give a shit because they have so much money that they're buying 5-7 years in the future because they're just hedging their own bets. They're like, look, there's no doubt right now we need this much power. We're going to need this much more. Let's go buy a fraction of that power through you guys, knowing that they won't need it for 5 to 7 years. But the shit that's production environment today, it can't be renewables because it seems like it takes forever. It's not going to be the grid because the grid doesn't give a shit.
I don't know. I'm saying we could bring online 5 gigawatts of wind and 3 gigawatts of solar by the end of 2030.
That's
2025.
You're saying you could do that in 5 years from now in the state of Texas?
Yeah.
You could, but you won't. It's like saying hydrogen's a great technology, not in the application that we use it for this. It doesn't pencil out. But you can, but you won't. Has your industry ever done that?
That much build?
Yeah.
We've done a lot more build than that year on year.
Yes or no? You guys have done 8 gigs or whatever it is that you just said in less than 4 or 5 years?
The industry, absolutely.
Okay. The industry has, but not for one project, right?
I mean,
What would it take to move heaven and earth to get that going in the state of Texas right now?
I actually don't think it's that difficult. Texas is not a difficult place to develop the energy.
You're right. I think that's why everyone's coming here, because it's easier. But like renewables aren't building fast, right? They're not moving quick. Their studies take forever. If they were, we would have focused more on the reliability aspect instead of the scalability aspect of that industry. The industry needs so much power that we can't. Yeah, in 5 years from now, they know that they're going to need 300 or 500. They know that they're going to do that because they need 10 times that amount now. If I had the money, I'd be buying renewable plants in the future, 5, 6, 7 years out. Right now, what are you quoting people for how much it'll time? If they want a gigawatt in Texas right now, what's your quote to them, West Texas, starting from now?
Starting from now, a gigawatt, you could probably bring that on by 28.
No shit.
Yeah.
So you could get a gigawatt of solar in 3 years in Texas?
Yeah, that's not a problem. We're talking about 8 gigawatts by the end of 2030. It's part of that program.
So you would only do that if someone was going to take that down, though, and they are betting that they're not going to have that power for 3 years. So you have to find someone that could wait 3 years for a gigawatt of power.
Or scale up to it.
Yeah. So what would they do? Is they enter them for the bridge before they got to you? So more natural gas, you think?
If the natural gas could come online at that scale in that time frame.
What will SMRs do for you?
I don't know. I mean,
Will it be accretive to you guys? You guys see it as renewable energy or more sustainable?
I don't know. Traditionally, all the technologies have been somewhat siloed. I think that, going forward with all of the new technologies emerging, all companies are going to have to sit down and say, hey, what does renewables mean to us? What does carbon-free mean to us? So personally, I don't discount it. It's a new technology. Historically, we've been focused on proven technologies. We haven't taken technology risk. But as it emerges as a proven technology, I can't tell you. I'd say we're not shunning it.
How do you see the technology evolving? Like, there's a lot of technologies evolving in automobiles in terms of emission or on the stacks where we do, generate power. What do you see? Do you see like there's going to be a more efficient method of harnessing solar from? I believe that that's possible. I think that we're going to create a better product that can bring on a larger volume of it more efficiently or faster and have a greater rate of saving it or storaging it for a certain amount of time, right? But are you seeing advances in technology applications amongst wind and solar right now that make it more favorable?
What we've seen are more incremental improvements, right? We're not focusing on what's happening in the labs, but year on year, turbines have gotten way more productive, wind turbines.
Yeah.
Solar panels did have an incredible cost decline until probably 3 years ago, and
What was it?
inflation hit and tariffs hit. A lot of the supply chain
Materials.
is in
China.
Asia and China, and that's changing. I mean, there are factories that are getting set up in the United States, but that takes a bit of time too.
Okay, so you see renewables playing a bigger role then, being able to be more competitive in the future?
I think they'll always continue to be a very cheap form of energy, and that the cost will continue to go down over time.
Are they a cheap form of energy,
They're
though?
going to be part of a blend, part of a mix.
Yeah. Yeah. How much do you think renewables we will put on the grid? How much renewables on the grid right now? Do you know? What percentage?
Just over 100 gigawatts.
Is that like percentage wise? Is that like 10% of the grid right
It's
now?
like 8% of the energy generated.
All right. So how do we get that how do you move the needle to the left or up to the right on that, I guess, is what I would say. How do you get more of that out of it?
Yeah, a lot of it's trapped in the middle of the country. So it's transmission to tap that. If you look at a map of where the wind is in the country, it's just right up the middle of the country.
So will we go there and build data centers then?
I think some will get built out there.
Instead of transmission lines
I don't
feeding
know if
back
all of
to-
them or most of them, but I think some will get built out there.
Are you not getting those types of requests right now from
We are, but not fully islanded.
interesting. Why is that? They're not ready for that?
I don't know that they are. I mean, when they are, then it would be, like I said, I think it would be a combination of wind, solar, and either battery storage or gas peakers provides you the reliable solution that you need.
Man, I guess we're gonna have to get one of those large hyperscale groups up here. Which the problem with the operators is every CEO is super squealy on what they're talking about, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all their IP. No one, you never like when you go to these conferences, you're not going to see a lot of Google or Facebook or Amazon or those people because they're in a cloud war. They're all fighting over what they're utilizing and what they're getting out of their resources and stuff. But the operators themselves don't like talking about power either because it's an area of vulnerability at risk for them, or are they and they just don't feel comfortable talking about it, or there's so much volatility in the swing rates in which people are utilizing energy that there's 5 to 7 players in the market right now that are going to be able to go out and buy 5 years down the road. And I bet you some of the operators will get there too soon. Are you seeing the operators making those large investments too, or just the enterprise groups? Like the end users, I could see it doing because they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
But the operators are going to be like, do I build this? And would it make me more competitive to be able to attract more clients here because I could give them that? Or is, in essence, do they become a proxy utility provider once they start really doing that as a service?
Yeah, they become a proxy utility supplier unless they're just doing a PPA with the company offering it as a service. Like they could do a PPA with us, guaranteed by the ultimate tenant, and then sell the power to them. So they're an intermediary.
How's that work exactly? So they have power they're buying from you, and then power they're buying from the local utility as well. And that's how do they know which? I guess it's 2 different meters. That's how they figure out what power is coming from where and who to pay for what.
That's right.
How do they know where they're pulling from then? And I apologize if these are stupid questions.
It's metered when like the renewables aren't generating. It just automatically
That's it.
AGC pulls from the grid.
Okay. Do you see the efficiencies of renewables getting better year over year right now? Like we're able to get more days or more hours or whatever the efficiency rate
the
is?
efficiency's been going up, definitely.
At what rate? Single digit, double digit?
It's getting better in lower wind speed regimes. It was already pretty efficient. I mean, 50 to 55% NCF for wind is pretty good. I don't see it going much up beyond that. You start to probably ideally scale up and bring down the cost on the cost side. Solar, again, we're seeing less technological improvements. They're going to bigger panels, which bring down the construction cost and the installation cost of it.
Okay.
But it's all on the cost side.
That has to have an impact on schedule too? That must be beneficial, right? If the cost is going down.
You can bring in the schedule a little bit, yep.
What are some of the other patterns you're seeing? Anything crazy that you've had a request from one of these large, I don't expect you to name which one, but I would imagine one of these hyperscalers came up and had something that was a pretty big, hairy, audacious request or goal. No?
Yeah, multi-gigawatt data centers. Several people looking for them out there, probably in Texas somewhere because you have the regulatory environment to do it. And a lot of the customers want, if they have the option for clean, reliable energy, they'll want it.
How much land does it take? Like knowing that if you're going to do a 100 megawatt data center, you need 40 acres at a minimum of land for that as an example.
Yeah, so for 100 megawatts, you're probably looking at 30 acres per megawatt.
30 acres per meg.
For wind. And then you can use all
wind.
that. You can use everything up to it. For solar, you're probably closer to 5 acres per megawatt.
No shit. Interesting. So that's good to know. So 5 acres per megawatt for wind and 30 for solar?
30 for wind and 5 for solar because it's much more dense. With the wind, you want to spread everything out. So, you have one wind turbine and then you can use all the land in between it and the next turbine, but you kind of need 30 acres to keep them spaced out. And to
you do
keep
need that much space, huh?
Yeah.
Why do you need them that far apart? Just curious.
They'll wake each other, so they'll block the wind for the next turbines down the row.
Really? Okay, good to know. So that's why when we first started talking, I'm like, man, this is so much shit that people don't understand. And I don't know if, there's going to be people that listen to this podcast that do low voltage terrestrial cabling or UPSs or some shit, and they're going to be like, this doesn't have any impact on me. And I'm like, it has every impact on every project. Power and labor are the critical path items to every program today. Would you agree? So if you can't figure out how to analyze and interpret the market trends on power and labor, you're never going to understand how to get your product, whether it's a service or an actual widget itself, you're never going to figure out how to position it in the market, right? So what you're seeing right now is like, name which state are you seeing the most traction right now? Is it Texas?
Right now, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
there are others, Arizona, Oregon, where they're working with the utilities to grow, and so we would work with the utilities as a partner to them.
Is hydro one of the big things you're getting into in the Pacific Northwest at all?
No.
Is that game over?
I think most of it's been developed.
Yeah, there's only so much of that. I think that was the big sprawl up there was the hydroelectric at 2.5 cents per kWh. Is that what it was? Something like that. What is solar and what's the best rate you're getting on solar and wind on the renewable side through you guys right now? The longer the term, obviously, the better the rate. But what's a good rate?
Probably 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Probably a little bit less for solar and a little bit more for wind.
But still pretty good in comparison to most markets. So, And you're talking about massive volumes of land that you're taking down for that shit too then, huh? So I bet you there's people that are listening, they're going to have some questions because they have land. Like we are, it's a really interesting thing. Everybody that has land now, right, has a desire to understand the value of that land relative to its capacity to be a data center. So we do a lot of data center site feasibility studies now. People will be like, this is what I got, these 400 acres or whatever it is. What is the capabilities and limitations of that space for data centers? Knowing that we can't just measure it based on the water and all. We need to understand where the power is going to come in at. You know, is there natural gas lines and adjacent to the land or something that's running through it? Yeah. But power and labor are the two greatest crutches right now. So everyone that's listening is tied back to labor and power as a consumer as well as, what we do for our day jobs. So people here that don't understand where the power hits them, they need to probably read in a little bit more and know more about this. Where do we go and find out more information on like 30 acres of land for solar, 5 per megawatt for sun or solar, and then wind is 30, right? So like if I did the math and I have clients that have arbitrarily 1,200 acres, I could be like, look, you could do this much solar there in addition to this and this and this and this, right? So I mean, like there's a metric that we could use to break this down and back into, right?
There is that you have big exclusion zones too. Like if you have wetlands, of course, anything you can't really build on. If you have military flyway, you know about that. You don't want to put turbines in it. If you have an endangered species migration or nesting area, so you take that big plot of land, and there are definitely a bunch of exclusions. So it's hard to give an absolute rule of thumb, though. What I told you is probably the best, assuming that there are no exclusions there.
How do we accelerate this to where it doesn't take so long? Because when we first started, you're like, yeah, I got products 5, 7, 8, 15 years in development. And then you're like, dude, I could develop gigawatts in less than 5 years of solar and wind in Texas.
You talked about going off grid, number one. 2, going to places where it's easy to develop, like a Texas or, it's another state. I mean, depending on where you are, New Mexico can be a good place. Oklahoma can be a good place. You combine those two things, and you have certainty that if you build it off of a transmission system, that there will be a buyer for it, which you don't have. You kind of need to tee up your offtake up front before you completely go speculative on that. Then you can really compress things. I mean, you can build, from leasing the land through bringing the last wind turbine of a 1 gigawatt project online, you can be probably five years. That might be even conservative, but you can start to pull it in quite a bit. And then with quite a lot of certainty, too, in many parts of the country.
All right. So this has been really good for us. What else am I not asking about power that you want to educate us on? Because I only know what I know.
I see this huge surge in demand. That's the signal that we're getting. It's amazing demand. Personally, I think we sometimes get lost in the discussion of this technology versus that when it's like, to meet those goals, there's no silver bullet.
All right.
You got to hit a bunch of stuff and then follow on with it. You've got to develop these new technologies and improve them, because it's not like it stops in 5 years. It seems like that demand signal continues.
Well, I think for that demand conversation, people need to understand, like, how many times are you talking to people and like, I need this shit next year?
Yeah.
And that's just not possible, right? So, like, how do we condition and coach people to be like, look, if this is shit you need, and 5 years from now, now's the time to have this conversation. 3 years from now, now's the time to have this conversation. If you want to have this conversation and to have your power up in 18 months from now, we're too late, right? Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, we got to get people more involved in listening and engaging and asking questions about this stuff. Don't you agree?
I absolutely think so. And learning about all the different technologies, right? I mean,
what's changing in those technologies between storage, wind, and solar? Not much, right?
It's been there, and it's been fast relative to a lot of other things that are being talked about.
But like batteries are batteries,
it's low cost, yeah. That's right. And that's part of the beauty of it.
Seal lead acid, lithium ion, whatever.
That's part of the beauty of it is it is eminently financeable. There's no technology risk that anybody's taking.
Yeah.
So if you want it to happen quick, that's the way to go. Is I think renewables, some natural gas and storage are the options that can be brought online very quickly that are proven technologies that have been financed over and over and over again.
I think what I'm realizing, and I think others are too, is this industry, the data center industry, grew at a double-digit CAGR. Like, what was COVID like in your industry? When COVID hit?
We actually grew.
Okay. So,
yeah.
I mean, We did too, right?
Yeah.
The adoption rate of technology only grew. I mean,
Yeah.
think about everyone that worked from home, and teams, had a 750% demand spike in cloud, utilization in the first 72 hours and it never went down, right? So there's so much massive demand of technology. Did COVID have an impact on your guys' industry or vertical and growth, or were you guys just so essential that it just didn't stop growing?
Just kept going. I think we hit the uptick probably in 2018, 2019, where, especially a lot of the tech companies and a lot of industrial companies started buying renewables en masse, and it just kept going.
Is there anyone that's buying any vertical of industry that's more aggressive in their form of trying to capture energy than us in the data center side right now?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think you're the ones that are growing the most, have the most power needs.
Yeah, and that's us, right?
Yeah.
And so think about this. There was a time where people didn't really understand that there was a limitation to. I think our industry grew so aggressively because when we stopped using minutes and shifted to data on our phones, when we had smartphones with applications, I think that there was this thing that we had this unlimited amount of data, right? I mean, we generate more data now every 6 to 9 months on this planet than the previous history combined, right? So we are generating so much data, and the industry was growing so massively that we're talking together today because your industry and my industry are face to face, and our industry will probably change the way your industry does things by making things maybe move faster to some extent, while simultaneously your industry will change ours by forcing us to slow down. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because I think that what comes with the maturity of having a mainstream vertical of industry is it's followed by regulation, governance, which typically comes and is followed by a lot of ethics, right? So your industry has a lot of ethics, shit tons of studies. People are going to measure how does that impact the bird, how does that impact all those things.
Yeah.
Ours was like, what are we talking about? That kid wants more TikTok, or they want more, whatever. We're gonna put more of this horsepower out there. But the reality is it's the first time since we've come off minutes and shifted to data that we're now looking at a finite amount of resources, and it's formed and we sell in our space. You sell the same thing we sell, which is power. Our data center capacity is not sold based on square footage. It's sold based on kW. Right? Or MW. So you sell product based on power as well. Our two industries are combining and colliding in that perspective, but it's one industry that is wild, wild west from one perspective, but it's hundreds of years old or 100 years old, and then a brand new emerging industry that we've never seen limitations to what we can do. And now is the first time where we consumers will have to either make a conscious effort and decision to use less technology, so there's less demand on that infrastructure, or we're going to have to start adopting different forms of energy. I was trying to get to in this conversation, like how long do you think it takes before we shift from fossil fuel and coal to a larger, you're saying we're like 10% renewables stay on the grid, but we'll eventually be 30, and then we'll eventually be more than that. There's some countries, you saw nuclear now, there's some countries that are already full carbon friendly, right? Smaller, those are like the size of Delaware or the size of Rhode Island, so it's easier as a country. If you're Norway and you're not even the size of, Connecticut, yeah, it's going to be really easy for you to shift your entire economy over to one thing over the other. But as a nation, it's going to be a little bit harder for us because we have many more states, right? And in most of these states, I mean, there's 5-6 states in the United States that are bigger from a GDP perspective than most of 95% of the world, right? So we have a huge country. We are the sky for the cloud and the home for AI. And there's going to be this huge need for energy. And we're going to have to figure out how to get your industry and ours to kind of work a little bit closer together and more aligned. We already sell a product based on the same metric. Yeah. It's just there's so much regulation in yours and no regulation at all in ours that there's going to be this new thing to where, I mean, the product itself for a data center used to be 4 walls and a roof and a lot of MEP density. And today it's all of that plus power. Right, and they have to typically not just find grid connection requests, but we're going to go to places where there's, look, the state of Texas is a fantastic state for building AI data centers. There's 226 different colleges and universities. We have more than 15 different military bases. We have access to the largest amount of land and renewable energy and fiber, and we have access to the largest labor force, not including what we do in trades, right? So there's going to be a lot of shit that's built here. But there's so many things that are unknown on renewables still before we get here that this conversation is going to have to be iterative. Like we may have to have some conversations at DCAC where
Absolutely.
like start doing some trending, start doing some more information. That way when next time we talk, you come on and be like, let me tell you what we've seen. These are the 5 states that are getting the most pent up demand for this. And this is why, right? And you're going to see, this industry having to slow down for the first time because we're selling so far ahead of the curve that right now there are people that are trying to buy engines for 2027. We just started 2025, right? And that's the gold rush, the data center gold rush that started in 2024 doesn't end until the end of 2030, right? So we have a lot of time to put together pickaxe and shovel so the world could go fucking gold rush on this data center stuff. And we're really going to be dependent on power. Power now is the number one thing holding us up. People to drive that is going to be a huge factor. But the only way to have that is to have a greater mass of awareness. So I didn't understand how your industry worked, and I've had not a lot of power people on recently. I have power people every week for the next 5-6 weeks. I have nuclear people. It's
complicated. It's not complicated once you figure it out, but man, there's a lot to sort through until you do figure it out.
Renewables is so frustrating because it is complicated, but it's so necessary, right? And for us, people would be like, hey, man, I want 75 megawatts online in 9 months from now. We'd be like, that's the utilities. If the utility could do it, we could do it. We could build a data center as fast as you want, 24/7, 365, 3 shifts of 8 until we rock 7 days a week. However, doesn't matter if the utility provider can't give power. And once we saw Dominion start raising the red flag, saying, hey, we need to stop and claw back the people that have already made purchasing agreements and aren't utilizing it, that's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a big red flag because that was the sky for the cloud. Now, the home for AI is West Texas, and it's a deregulated energy market, unlike parts of Virginia. And there's going to be some big changes that come here, but renewables are going to be one of those things where renewables take a long time. Natural gas is here right now. And, they're flaring in Midland and Odessa and stuff like that. It's a negative energy market. If they're not selling that shit, they have to flare it, right? Why wouldn't we use that energy? All the water that they use for desalination into the water treatment plants, we could use that for the mechanical permutations on data centers too, right? Yeah. There's so much taking place right now that we're going to really have to educate. We'll have to educate your side, and your side's going to have to educate us so we can figure out how to go to our clients because we share the same customers. And manage expectations because they're like, hey, I need this. And they used to have someone take care of the power and someone take care of the data center. Now that person's the same person. And the long pole in the tent is no longer going to be the data center. It's going to always be the power. But we're going to have temporary roll-up solutions. We're going to have long-term, sustainable, scalable solutions. And I think at some point, I don't know what you guys are predicting on the renewable side, but nuclear will be here one day. The nuclear energy is not new. It's a 76-year-old nuclear navy, right? So we have 34 different types of nuclear reactor and propulsion systems just in the Navy alone. I can't imagine how many different civilian prototypes of nuclear reactors exist, either MMRs or SMRs, right? So there's enough of these things that they're out there. It's just there's a lot of regulation, and I think a lot of that regulation also comes from, like you mentioned it earlier, and I didn't even think about it, but the biggest protest of resistance to what renewables has to offer probably isn't the communities themselves. It's the people that offer a competitive product to that, like gas, like oil. And they're the first ones that are like, we don't need those renewables. Make it take 5 years for that to work. You could have my gas tomorrow, though. You know what I'm saying? So, there's going to have to be a breakthrough. We need, a Doge to hit this energy vertical and rip out all the inefficiencies, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, definitely we've been operating in silos. All the generators have been operating in silos, and I think that we get a common group looking at it and saying, hey, how do we make this make sense again?
Yeah.
How do we make the development and build out of gigawatts upon gigawatts of power generation make the most sense?
We could do it faster than what we're doing right now. Our industry and your industry, we're going to push demand higher from the utility providers and from, again, or we're going to have to go back to people and be like, hey, dude, stop downloading more apps. Stop using more data.
I don't think that's going to happen.
So people don't realize, I don't care about this power.
We have to we're developing a capability, right? In some ways, it's a national capability.
It's a national security incident, too, now.
And it needs to happen fast because other people are doing it at incredible rates. So
I think that even China has admitted that we have a 5-year head start over them on AI. They release products, we release products, but their goal and their statement was that they would overtake America in the AI war by 2030. And what gives us an advantage in AI today is the number of mainframes that we put into existence between the 50s to the 60s to the 70s, going into the 80s before we started getting into other forms of computers. But really, in the 90s, we started creating the World Wide Web by putting so much fiber in the ground, right? Look at China. They have some parts of their country that are completely Stone Age, and other parts that are so densely populated that they can't just drill holes through those 47 buildings to get the fiber from one side of the building to the next. They have to do a lot of different things, where we put a lot of fiber in the ground a long time ago. A lot of the companies that put that fiber in the ground don't exist today, but the mainframes that we built, which was the precursor for most compute environments as well as AI, and all the fiber that we put in the ground, has given us this advantage to where we have the ability to do things that they haven't done because we're building large language models before them. But we know that AI is dependent upon energy. So whoever controls AI will control the most advanced weapon machinery and technology on this planet, and AI is dependent on energy. And we are a group that can't get out of our own way. As a country, we are a shit show when it comes to power. Yeah. We're not nearly as efficient as we should be, period, full stop. Yeah. However, we
haven't had to build power in years.
Demand is the key to driving this. And data centers, specifically the consumer of technology, the person that downloads more apps and use more eyeball content, video caching for streaming and uploading and downloading, they are the ones that are putting pressure on the infrastructure as consumers and the businesses that use it for e-commerce. And then that will put demand on the hyperscalers and the cloud providers and the AI providers, including the operators that maintain a home for them. And what's going to happen is it's going to force the industry to shift, right? Because we today don't have the ability to move the needle as fast as we need to. We're behind. We're hundreds of thousands of people short in this industry already. We're facing a silver tsunami. We have more than half of the industry has been in this industry for more than 20 years, and sadly, many of them were just simply waiting for the end of an election cycle, where there could be some stabilization in the global economy because there's a de-escalation of tension between us and China, or there's some wars in Israel or Ukraine that are going to be going away. And what we're going to see is a boom of an economy. And what happens is those people that were baby boomers are like, I'm out. Gen Z started overtaking the baby boomers in the workforce before the end of last year, right? So now you're going to see this huge group of people that went through an internship together. Everyone that was in this industry for 25, 30 years, since 1994, they all started in this industry together. No one had anybody to call, right? Energy was like, the utilities will take care of that. Now the product is the four walls, the roof, as well as the power that comes with it. And now we have to retool ourselves. You're doing that on your side, trying to understand data centers. Yeah. Our side is going out and every data center operator, enterprise end user or operator themselves, is going out and finding someone that used to work for a utility provider or someone that used to work for a renewable energy group like you. And they're saying, lead us through this shit. And the reality is it takes a long time. It's a slow process on renewables. Natural gas can move a little bit faster. Diesel is going to crush you. There's certain things we could do, but there's massive limiting factors, and it's not tenable. It's not scalable. But it's a short-term solution. Right now, there's people that are racing to those solutions while others are playing the long game.
We get there. Like, what's your projection for, call it, the end of 2030-ish? Give or take a little bit, and then how do you do it? I think about that.
I think national security is going to flag it. Right now, it's us consumers, and it's a basic function of economics. Does this make sense? Does that make sense? Is this worth investing to? I think what could happen, we take a real look. This may not be very popular, but I'm going to say it right here. There's a shitload of people that invested billions of dollars in this AI shit. What happens if AI doesn't pencil out? If it's supposed to improve the efficiencies of your life by 40% or 20%, but it really only does 10% because it just doesn't ever arrive to what we thought it was going to be, I think that you'll see a lot of people invest less into AI, and then we're going to have to figure out, how do we utilize the AI we have? Is it best served where kids could use it for ChatGPT to write all their papers in high school and in college? Maybe. Look, I'm okay with them learning those stupid skills, because when they become professionals and they work in a marketing team or a sales team, they're going to want to use AI to write their proposals or write their marketing propaganda. So then using those technologies is necessary. They're just using it for the wrong reasons right now. But we're going to end up using this technology until we understand the capabilities of other energy solutions like yours. Yours isn't just telling us the capabilities. Yours is explaining to us the limitations of time, and time is the number one factor. We consumers aren't waiting 3 years before I could download more more apps for my shit. I need it now, which means that someone else knows that. So if you're Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, you better be buying power 5 years out, or because that's how far out the consumer is going to be adopting whatever it is that you're using. If you're an operator, maybe it's not as important for you unless you really want to start attracting some of these things to make these purchasing decisions happen a lot faster. But I think that we're going to eventually get to a part where we crawl, walk, run out of fossil fuels, and we get closer to natural gas and renewables until we start using nuclear more prevalently, and we realize that it's much safer than what we think it is. There's just a lot of propaganda that was going against it. And again, a lot of that propaganda was driven by the people that had the most to lose by shifting to nuclear. Same people that have the most to lose when we shift to renewables. So we're on the same side, and I think that there'll be a big pivotal shift. I think it will be national security. I think that what happens is we're going to not want to relinquish by the end of 2030 our dominance on AI. We certainly don't want to give that to China or any of their allies who may not share in our belief systems and may want to use it for reasons that are not for defense, but more offensively, for getting access to other people's resources. But I know that we can't afford to sit back and say we don't want this energy because the rest of the world is clawing at it and they're all dying to get ahead of America on the curve. So we have no choice. From a national security perspective, we're going to have to shift energy solutions, and there's going to be winners and losers on the energy side.
I guess I wonder the same thing is it's all going to be very useful, but will it be used? Because are we going to adapt to be able to use the AI capabilities to their fullest on the same timeline?
I think AI is going to have to be consolidated in its utilization features because there's not going to be as much of it as what we thought because we don't have enough power to feed it as we thought. I mean, it's in its teenage adolescence right now, right? So we're feeding large language models as much data as we can, but those inference data centers are the only ones that make money, right? And it takes a long time to get those ones capable. It takes a lot of energy consumption. The biggest concern, if you're a data center owner operator, why would you want to go out to West Texas and sign a 1 gigawatt PPA knowing that it takes 5 years to feed a large language model, but when it hits a plateau and it's learned as much as, now it's just incrementally and iteratively learning. It's like spinning a ball on the tip of your finger. A lot easier to do than getting it spinning in the first place. So what happens at the end of year 5 and year 6 or year 7 when they don't have as much demand need because it's already learned? A lot of that is the prompting and the spiking, but there's so many things that happen that what happens when it hits not a plateau, but it's absorbed every ounce of information we could feed it to this point, and now it just requires a little bit of energy to maintain it. What are you going to do when you're sitting on a PPA for 20 years and you're like, shit, I don't need that much power anymore. I used it in 5 years and 10 years to build these large language models, but now I don't need it anymore. But now I'm paying for that shit still. So I think that you're going to see, I think that we're going to continue to have this passionate explosion of demand and everyone's racing for shit. But I think like the gold rush, people are going to be like, it's not what we thought it was. And yeah, we'll make a football team out of it now. Or,
that might be the main reason to connect it to the grid eventually, but you have a 10-year time frame to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing. I don't know what it will take, but I can tell you that people are going to be building at such an aggressive level now that they could give two shits about the grid in some markets. And there are some operators, I promise you, I've talked to enterprise end users and operators that are like, I'll never rely on the grid again once I get done doing this. The grid's never going to be obsolete, but it'll be more for the consumer and not for the business. And the biggest manufacturing shift we ever made was shifting everything over to Asia between India and China for that. And I mean, China and India, they don't look at it like that. They look at it as they outsource their marketing to America because we're so drunk on consumerism, right? The reality is the most important, most valuable, and most challenging thing to manufacture today is a data center. And most data centers are going to be built in America. So these people can control the components, but we will control the manufacturing of the sky for the cloud and the home for AI. We already have. We always will. We just have to own energy. And if not, then China will overtake us by the end of 2030 because, like I said, they have commissioned at least 10 reactors every year for the last few years, with the exception of last year. I understand they did 11. And they have nobody that gives a shit about, they could go build 100 coal plants all throughout the country. No one cares what the emission output would look like. So we have to remove some of the demand of manufacturing from them so that we can get them to stop polluting as much. No matter how much we do here, it won't matter if they're still pumping. There are islands, people don't know this. There are islands of trash floating in the North Pacific right now. That trash island is bigger than England, France, and Germany combined. Did you know that?
No.
Right. Those are the unintended consequences of each industrial revolution adding up. We're in the fifth industrial revolution now, so shit is changing fast. But these conversations, we've never had these types of conversations. So I've brought on energy traders that are talking about the volatility of the market, and I've brought on people that are I've brought on all kinds of engine manufacturers, specifically around natural gas, but I haven't really had the chance to talk to renewables people yet, and I don't feel like I still know enough to feel like I know enough, right? But this is going to be one of those things that's iterative over the course of time. We have to unpackage renewables because if I was an operator, I would buy renewables for the long term, but I would not invest a single penny into the short term on renewables because it doesn't have the ability to scale to the demand of the client, which is large volumes really fast. Volume and velocity is the product today.
Yeah.
Right? So
I don't know if anything can scale to that fast, though.
we're rolling up gens. We're rolling up. Trust me, they're getting there. We've been building these things, but I don't think that if it takes me that long and I'm getting closer on the nuclear side, will I shift and pivot more to nuclear since there's 76 years of nuclear science out there, right? We split the atom a long time ago. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do hope that you're looking at that because I really hope that you're the one that comes to me and says the vitality of that industry that you're in on the renewable side is it's not like it's going away in 5 years from now when nuclear hits mainstream or whatever arbitrary date that is. There will always be a need for it, but if it's regulated to the point where it takes that much time, then there's not going to be as much of a need for it.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think the renewables will continue to be low-cost producers where they make the most sense. They won't make the most sense everywhere.
what's the sweet spot for renewables?
In wind, it's going to be right up the middle of the country where, one, it's cheap, it's really windy.
Volume and size. What's the right size to make where it's 100 megawatts? That's perfect. Just make a bunch of those 100 megawatts or 1 gigawatts. Make a bunch of
You can
those.
just start a program and just keep going,
Okay.
right? Start a
Caterpillar
program, just
out.
keep going, keep the construction crews there and keep working.
So this renewable side is fascinating. We have a lot to learn. And I bet you I'm going to get a lot of feedback from this podcast too, where people are like, why didn't you ask this or why didn't you ask that? My thing is this. Keep trying to understand how to create the market message regarding renewables in a way that we can package it up and use these platforms to explain it to other people, because that's what this is for, is to help educate people and give a platform to other voices that don't normally get rolling. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to have other renewable people follow up. I'm going to have I have a nuclear guy coming on, right?
I'm excited to hear it.
Me too, because like, look, every time I'm sitting here, I feel like the dumbest person in the room, right? I normally am, but I need to understand these things better for the sake of our customers, for the sake of this industry, for the sake of my companies, right? So we have to get this shit rolling. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to?
You asked some really good questions. You know, I mean, historically, we've not had to sell the industry on the ability to build something in 2 years or 3 years, right? That has not been the constraint, but. You know, one thing we can offer is we can scale up, get into a program where we're delivering a lot each year. That's something that can happen. We just haven't had this amount of demand in 15 years, you know?
Well, it's not just that, but you have people that are magnitude strong, like big enough to start buying power 3, 4, 5+ years out.
Yeah.
Because they're like, look, I ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
I can't afford to do that right now. And I'm going to start investing in future infrastructure 5 years out. A lot of companies, especially if you're a publicly traded mission critical REIT, that's going to get your ass kicked on a quarterly basis based on, you know, most of the publicly traded mission critical REITs, their clients aren't the customers that walk in the data centers anymore. Their clients are shareholders, and that's it, right? So they don't give a shit. They're just trying to hold on, right? So there's going to be this. We're in an inflection point in this industry right now, and energy is driving this. But we're going to be good for your industry, and your industry is going to be good for us, because it does bring us to the mainstream, and we help you guys speed up a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's going to put some
If you can
wind.
help us speed up, that's great for us too.
Well, the demand is what's going to
Right.
drive that.
Yeah.
It's like this. Yeah, we'll wait 3 years for technology to emerge so you can build power. It's not going to work like that. It's never worked like that. People will have to change, but I do think that there's a lot of big changes coming. Do you agree?
I absolutely think so. Yeah.
Well, listen, man, is there anything I didn't ask you?
Not that I can think of. I really appreciate it.
Well, let me ask you one last question. I ask everyone this question. It's not a hard question, but it's sometimes challenging to understand or for to others to answer. What do you tell people you do for a living?
I develop renewable energy.
Okay. So that's a lot easier. I think a lot of people can understand that. There's a keyword and tricky phrase in there that everyone's seen on the news or heard about, but renewables are clean and it's healthy. Do you ever tell people about data centers?
Increasingly, when I'm talking to people who actually know more about what I do, I
Yeah.
am talking about data centers.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're all trying to figure it out. How do we fit together, right?
Yeah.
Like the sales pitch is different, the product is different. Maybe you can be more creative.
Well, the oil and gas
Ideal
people are
system-
different. The natural gas people are different. The
Yeah.
renewables people are different. Like so far, I'm going around the horn. I'm like, they're all their own little niche worlds within a big world of energy. you
Yeah,
know? It's so much different.
exactly. And I think to like overcome these challenges, we do have to zoom out,
Yeah.
figure out a bigger, more integrated solution.
Well, this is the first of this discussion, but hopefully not the last. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate you taking the time for flying into Austin and unpouring your brain onto this stuff. You can see that there's a million questions regarding this stuff, but we're not gonna figure it all out in one time. We're gonna have to sit down and have these conversations regularly. So I hope that I could invite you back to either on this or the data center anti-conference that we do here in Austin once a year.
Absolutely.
But let's keep unpackaging renewables, okay?
Sounds good.
Man, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much
great.
for being here.
Yep, thank you.